Chapter 1. The Quiet Village. The village of St. Mary Mead lay nestled in a gentle dip of the English countryside, its thatched cottages and winding lanes bathed in the soft gold of a late summer afternoon. To an outsider, it was the picture of pastoral serenity. Roses climbed over stone walls, the church bell tolled with lazy precision, and the air carried the faint sweetness of freshly cut grass. But to those who lived here, St. Mary Mead was a living tapestry, woven with secrets, rivalries, and the kind of quiet mischief that only a small community could nurture. At the heart of this tapestry sat Miss Jane Marple, a woman whose unassuming presence belied a mind sharper than a tailor's shears. Her cottage, a modest affair with lace curtains and a neatly tended garden, was a hub of observation. From her window she could see the comings and goings of the village, the postman's bicycle wobbling under the weight of parcels, the vicar's hurried strides toward the church, and the occasional stranger who dared to disrupt the rhythm of St. Mary Mead. Miss Marple knitted, sipped tea, and watched, and in watching she understood. On this particular afternoon, the village was abuzz with a rare excitement. A newcomer had arrived, and not just any newcomer, but one who carried the weight of wealth and mystery. The manor house at the edge of St. Mary Mead, long shuttered since the death of old Colonel Bantry, had been purchased by a certain Mr. Reginald Hawthorne, a man whose name was whispered with equal parts curiosity and suspicion. He was said to be a retired financier from London, or perhaps a recluse fleeing some scandal, or, depending on who you asked, a collector of rare artefacts with a penchant for the macabre. The truth, as always, was harder to pin down. Miss Marple, seated in her armchair with a half-finished scarf in her lap, had heard the rumours from her maid Lily, who had a knack for gathering gossip as efficiently as she dusted the furniture. "They say he's got crates arriving at the manor, miss," Lily had said that morning, her eyes wide with intrigue. "Crates so heavy they needed 4 men to carry them. And Mrs. Price, at the post office, says he's been getting letters from all over, France, Italy, even America." Miss Marple had nodded, her expression serene, but her mind already turning. Heavy crates and foreign letters were interesting, certainly, but it was the man himself who piqued her curiosity. Why would someone like Reginald Hawthorne choose St. Mary Mead, a place so far removed from the glittering circles of London or the cosmopolitan bustle of Paris? People came to villages like this to hide, to heal, or to hunt. She wondered which it was. The answer began to take shape that very afternoon, when an invitation arrived at her cottage. It was delivered by a young man in a crisp suit, his manner polite but hurried, as if he were unaccustomed to the slow pace of village life. The envelope was thick, creamy paper, embossed with a crest that Miss Marple did not recognize. Inside, written in an elegant hand, was a request for her presence at a dinner party at the manor the following evening. "Mr. Reginald Hawthorne cordially invites Miss Jane Marple to dine at Hawthorne Manor," it read, followed by a date and time. There was no mention of the occasion, no hint of why she, of all people, had been summoned. Miss Marple turned the invitation over in her hands, noting the faint scent of sandalwood that clung to the paper. She had not met Mr. Hawthorne, nor had she any connection to the manor beyond her old friendship with Colonel Bantry's widow Dolly. Yet here was an invitation, formal and deliberate, as if her presence were not merely desired but required. It was, she thought, the kind of gesture that carried weight, the kind that suggested a purpose. She set the invitation on her writing desk and resumed her knitting, though her thoughts were far from the click of her needles. A dinner party at the manor was an event, and events in St. Mary Mead were never as simple as they seemed. She recalled a similar gathering years ago, when a seemingly innocuous tea party had unravelled a web of jealousy and betrayal. People revealed themselves at such occasions, their masks slipping over wine and polite conversation. Miss Marple intended to watch closely. The next morning, the village was alive with speculation. At the grocer's, Mrs. Price was holding court, her apron dusted with flour as she recounted the latest tidbits about Hawthorne. "He's hired staff, you know," she said to a cluster of eager listeners. "A cook from London, a butler who looks like he's stepped out of a novel, and a gardener who doesn't speak a word of English. And those crates, mark my words, there's something odd about them. My nephew saw them being unloaded, and he swears one was marked with a strange symbol, like a snake eating its own tail." Miss Marple, who had stopped by to purchase a tin of biscuits, listened without comment. A snake eating its own tail was an Ouroboros, a symbol of eternity, rebirth, or perhaps something more sinister. She filed the detail away, along with the names of the new staff. A cook, a butler, a gardener, each a potential thread in the tapestry she was beginning to weave. By midday, the invitation had become the talk of the village. It seemed Mr. Hawthorne had invited a select group: the vicar, Mr. Clement, the local, Dr. Haydock, Dolly Bantry, of course, and surprisingly, young Lucy Eilers-Barrow, a woman known for her sharp wit and knack for solving practical problems. The guest list was eclectic, to say the least, and Miss Marple found herself wondering what connected them. Was it mere neighbourly courtesy, or did Hawthorne have a deeper motive? That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars appeared, Miss Marple prepared for the dinner. She chose a simple black dress, adorned only with a brooch shaped like a rose, and wrapped a shawl around her shoulders. Her appearance was unremarkable, deliberately so, but her eyes were bright with anticipation. She had a feeling, a prickle, at the back of her neck, that this dinner would mark the beginning of something extraordinary. The walk to Hawthorne Manor was short but atmospheric. The lane was lined with ancient oaks, their branches forming a canopy that filtered the moonlight into dappled patterns. The manor itself loomed at the end of the drive, its stone facade, softened by ivy, but imposing nonetheless. Lights glowed from the windows, and the sound of a gramophone drifted faintly into the night, playing something slow and melancholic. At the door, Miss Marple was greeted by the butler, a tall man with a face as impassive as marble. "Good evening, Miss Marple," he said, his voice smooth and faintly accented. "Mr. Hawthorne is expecting you." She stepped into the foyer, where a chandelier cast flickering shadows on the walls. The air was heavy with the scent of polished wood and something else, something sharp, like old metal. The other guests were already gathered in the drawing-room, their voices a low hum of polite chatter. Dolly Bantry waved her over, her face alight with excitement. "Jane, isn't this thrilling?" Dolly whispered, clutching a glass of sherry. "I haven't been in this house since the Colonel's day, and now here we are, dining with a perfect stranger. What do you make of it?" Miss Marple smiled, her gaze sweeping the room. Dr. Haydock was deep in conversation with the vicar, while Lucy Eilers Barrow stood by the fireplace, her expression thoughtful. And there, at the centre of it all, was Reginald Hawthorne himself. He was not what she had expected. Tall and lean, with silver hair and eyes that seemed to pierce rather than observe. He moved with the grace of a man accustomed to command. His suit was impeccably tailored, but there was a roughness to his hands, as if they had known harder work than ledgers and pens. He caught her eye and inclined his head, a gesture that felt less like courtesy and more like acknowledgment. "Miss Marple," he said, crossing the room to greet her. His voice was low, with a trace of amusement. "I'm delighted you could join us. I've heard you're a woman of remarkable insight." She inclined her head in return, her smile polite but guarded. "You're very kind, Mr. Hawthorne. I'm merely a neighbour, curious about the new resident of our little village." He chuckled, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of calculation. "Oh, I think you're more than that. But come, let's dine. We have much to discuss." The dining room was a study in opulence, a long mahogany table set with silver and crystal, walls adorned with portraits of stern-faced ancestors who seemed to watch the proceedings with disapproval. The meal was exquisite: roast pheasant, glazed vegetables, a wine that tasted of sun-drenched vineyards. But Miss Marple paid more attention to the conversation than the food. Hawthorne was a skilled host, steering the talk from village matters to broader topics: art, history, the mysteries of human nature. He spoke of a recent acquisition, a rare book said to contain secrets lost to time, and his eyes lingered on each guest as if gauging their reaction. Miss Marple noticed Lucy stiffen at the mention of the book, while Dr. Haydock's fork paused mid-air. The vicar, meanwhile, seemed oblivious, waxing poetic about the virtues of charity. As the evening wore on, the atmosphere grew heavier, as if the room itself were holding its breath. Miss Marple felt it, the undercurrent of tension, the sense that this dinner was not merely a social gathering, but a stage, and they were all players in a drama yet to unfold. She watched Hawthorne, noting the way his fingers tightened around his glass, the way his smile never quite reached his eyes. Then, just as dessert was served, a delicate lemon tart, there was a sound from upstairs. A thud, sharp and unmistakable, followed by silence. The guests froze, their eyes darting to Hawthorne. He set down his glass, his expression unreadable. "Excuse me," he said, rising. "It seems we have an uninvited guest." He left the room, the butler trailing behind. Him! The guests exchanged glances, their earlier ease replaced by unease. Dolly leaned toward Miss Marple, her voice a whisper. "Jane, what was that? It sounded like trouble," Miss Marple murmured, her knitting needles still in her mind, weaving threads into patterns. She did not know what had caused the noise, but she knew one thing. The quiet village of St. Mary Mead was no longer so quiet. And she, Jane Marple, was exactly where she needed to be. Chapter 2. A Curious Invitation. The night air clung to Miss Jane Marple as she stood on the steps of Hawthorne Manor, her shawl drawn tightly against the sudden chill. The thud from upstairs lingered in her mind, a discordant note in the evening's carefully orchestrated symphony. Inside, the other guests remained in the dining room, their voices a muted buzz of speculation. But Miss Marple had excused herself to the foyer, ostensibly to fetch her handkerchief. In truth, she wanted a moment to think, to let the threads of the evening's events begin to weave themselves into a pattern. The manor's grandeur was undeniable, but there was a strangeness to it, a sense of being watched, not by the portraits on the walls, but by something less tangible. The chandelier above cast jagged shadows, and the faint metallic scent she'd noticed earlier seemed stronger here, mingling with the polish of the oak banister. She glanced toward the staircase, its curve disappearing into the darkness of the upper floors. Whatever had caused that noise was up there, and Reginald Hawthorne's swift departure suggested it was no mere accident. Before she could ponder further, the butler reappeared, his marble-like composure intact. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice as smooth as ever. "Mr. Hawthorne requests that the guests remain in the dining-room. A minor disturbance, nothing more. He will rejoin you shortly." She nodded, her expression one of mild acquiescence, but her eyes caught the slight tension in his posture, the way his hand lingered near the pocket of his waistcoat. "Of course," she said, her tone as light as a summer breeze. "I wouldn't dream of wandering." As she returned to the dining-room, she noted the guests' reactions. Dolly Bantry was fidgeting with her napkin, her earlier excitement replaced by unease. Dr. Haydock sat rigidly, his medical bag at his feet, as if he anticipated a call to action. The vicar, Mr. Clement, was murmuring something about the unpredictability of old houses, while Lucy Ilesbarrow stood by the window, her gaze fixed on the moonlit garden beyond. Each of them, Miss Marple thought, was a piece in a puzzle she had yet to fully assemble. The dessert plates remained untouched, the lemon tart growing soggy in the strained silence. Miss Marple took her seat, her hands folded neatly in her lap, and let the conversation, or lack thereof, wash over her. She was not one for idle chatter, but she knew its value. In the pauses between words, in the glances exchanged across the table, truths often revealed themselves. It was Lucy who broke the silence, her voice crisp and practical. "Do you think we should go see what's happened? That noise wasn't just a chair falling over." Dr. Haydock shook his head. "Best to stay put. If Hawthorne needs us, he'll say so. Could be nothing. A loose shutter. A cat in the attic." "A cat with lead boots, perhaps," Dolly muttered, earning a nervous chuckle from the vicar. Miss Marple said nothing, but her mind was racing. A cat, indeed. She recalled a similar incident in St. Mary Mead years ago, when a fallen vase had turned out to be a signal in a smuggling scheme. No, this was no accident. The timing was too precise, the host's reaction too controlled. She glanced at the empty chair where Hawthorne had sat, its carved back gleaming under the candlelight. He had orchestrated this evening with care, from the guest list to the rare book he'd mentioned. The thud, she suspected, was part of the performance. Minutes ticked by, marked by the slow chime of a grandfather clock in the hall. Just as the tension threatened to boil over, Hawthorne returned, his silver hair slightly dishevelled, but his smile as polished as ever. "My apologies," he said, taking his seat. "A minor issue with one of the crates upstairs. The staff have it in hand?" Miss Marple's eyes narrowed imperceptibly. Crates again. The same crates Lily had mentioned, heavy and mysterious, marked with symbols like the Ouroboros. She noted the faint smudge of dust on Hawthorne's cuff, the kind that came from handling something old and neglected. Whatever was in those crates, it was important enough to pull him away mid-dinner. The conversation resumed, stilted at first but gradually easing under Hawthorne's charm. He spoke of his plans for the manor, restoring the gardens, hosting charity events, perhaps even opening a library for the village. Yet Miss Marple sensed a hollowness in his words, as if they were a script rehearsed for their benefit. She watched the others searching for clues in their reactions. Lucy's fingers tapped restlessly against her glass. Dr. Haydock's jaw tightened at the mention of the library, and Dolly's eyes darted toward the ceiling, as if expecting another thud. As coffee was served, Hawthorne leaned back in his chair, his gaze sweeping the table. "I must confess," he said, his tone almost playful, "I invited you all here for more than just a meal. Each of you, in your way, is a pillar of St. Mary Mead. I want to understand this village, its heart, its secrets, and I believe you can help me." The vicar beamed, flattered by the sentiment, but Miss Marple felt a prickle of unease. Secrets. The word hung in the air, heavy with implication. She thought of the invitation, its sandalwood scent and embossed crest. It had been a summons, not a courtesy, and now she wondered if they were all being tested. "What sort of help?" Lucy asked, her voice cutting through the haze of politeness. "You've got a manor, staff, and apparently crates full of mysteries. What do you need? From us?" Hawthorne's smile widened, but there was a glint in his eyes, sharp as a blade. "Patience, Miss Islesbarrow. All will become clear. For now, let's enjoy the evening. Tomorrow, I'd like to invite you all back for a small tour of the manor. There are treasures here that I think you'll find fascinating." The word, treasures, sparked a ripple of interest. Dolly's eyes lit up, no doubt imagining jewels or paintings, while Dr. Haydock's frown deepened. Miss Marple, however, was thinking of the crates. Treasures could mean many things, books, artifacts, or something far less benign. She recalled the Ouroboros, its endless cycle of destruction and renewal. Was Hawthorne a collector, a scholar, or something else entirely? The evening drew to a close, and the guests began to depart, their farewells tinged with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Miss Marple lingered, adjusting her shawl as she watched Hawthorne bid good-night to the vicar. She wanted a moment alone with him, a chance to probe the edges of his carefully constructed facade. As the others filed out, she approached him, her smile as gentle as a grandmother's. "A lovely evening, Mr. Hawthorne," she said. "You've given us much to think about." He inclined his head, his eyes meeting hers with that same calculating flicker. "I hope so, Miss Marple. I have a feeling you, in particular, will find tomorrow's tour enlightening." She nodded, her expression serene but her mind alert. "I look forward to it. Old houses are full of stories, aren't they? One only needs to know where to look." For a moment his smile faltered, and she saw something in his face, surprise perhaps, or recognition. Then it was gone, replaced by his usual charm. "Indeed," he said. "Good night, Miss Marple." As she stepped into the night, the manors, lights fading behind her, Miss Marple felt the weight of the evening settle into her bones. The invitation, the thud, the crates, the cryptic talk of treasures. It was all part of a larger design, one she was only beginning to glimpse. She thought, Of the guests, each with their own secrets and motives. Dolly's nervous chatter, Lucy's sharp questions, Dr. Haydock's guarded demeanour, they were all threads in the same tapestry. The walk back to her cottage was quiet, the village asleep under a blanket of stars. But Miss Marple's mind was far from restful. She thought of the butler's hidden tension, the dust on Hawthorne's cuff, the Ouroboros symbol that seemed to coil through every rumour, and she thought of the manor itself, its walls holding secrets older and darker than any of them could guess. By the time she reached her gate, she had made a decision. Tomorrow's tour would be more than a polite excursion. It would be a chance to observe, to listen, to peel back the layers of Reginald Hawthorne's carefully crafted mystery. She would go armed with her knitting needles and her unerring sense of human nature, ready to unravel whatever lay hidden in the shadows of Hawthorne Manor. As she closed her door and lit a single candle, Miss Marple allowed herself a small smile. The game, as a certain detective might say, was afoot, and she intended to play it to the end. Chapter 3. The Manor's Shadow. The morning sun crept over St. Mary Mead, its rays filtering through the mist that clung to the village like a whispered secret. Miss Jane Marple stood at her cottage window, a cup of tea cooling in her hands as she watched the world awaken. The events of the previous evening at Hawthorne Manor lingered in her mind, each detail a thread in the tapestry she was weaving. The thud from upstairs, Reginald Hawthorne's cryptic talk of treasures, the dust on his cuff. They were fragments, but fragments could become a pattern if one knew how to look. She had slept little, her thoughts too restless for dreams. Instead, she had sat by her fire, knitting a scarf that grew longer with each turn of her mind. The invitation to return to the manor for a tour today was no mere courtesy, she was certain. Hawthorne had a purpose, and the guests, herself included, were part of it. But what was he seeking? And why had that thud, so sharp and deliberate, felt like the opening note of a symphony she could not yet hear? By 9 o'clock, the village was stirring, and Miss Marple prepared for the day. She chose a sensible tweed skirt and a lavender blouse, her brooch pinned neatly at her collar. Her appearance was, as always, unremarkable, but her eyes were bright with purpose. She tucked a small notebook into her handbag, its pages ready for the observations she would undoubtedly make. In St. Mary Mead, nothing was ever quite as it seemed, and Hawthorne Manor was no exception. The walk to the manor was brisk, the air sharp with the promise of autumn. The lane was quiet, save for the crunch of gravel under her shoes and the distant call of a rook. As she approached the manor, its stone facade loomed through the mist, its windows like eyes watching her approach. The ivy that clung to the walls seemed to tighten its grip, as if guarding secrets older than the house itself. At the gate, she was joined by Dolly Bantry, whose cheerful wave belied the nervous edge in her voice. "Jane, I hardly slept a wink," Dolly confessed, her hat slightly askew. "That noise last night, it's got me all in a tizzy. Do you think it was really just a crate? It sounded so deliberate." Miss Marple smiled, her expression serene, but her mind alert. "Old houses are full of noises, Dolly, but I dare say Mr. Hawthorne will enlighten us today." Dolly huffed, unconvinced. "He's a charming man, I'll grant you, but there's something about him. like he's playing a game, and we're all pieces on his board." Miss Marple said nothing, but she agreed. Hawthorne was a strategist, and this tour was his next move. She wondered what he hoped to reveal, or conceal. The other guests arrived shortly after. Dr. Haydock, his medical bag slung over his shoulder. Mr. Clement, the vicar, clutching a worn prayer book, and Lucy Islesbarrow, her sharp eyes scanning the manor as if it were a puzzle to be solved. They exchanged polite greetings, but the air was thick with unspoken questions. The thud, the crates, the talk of treasures. Each guest carried their own suspicions, and Miss Marple watched them all, noting the way Dr. Haydock's fingers tightened on his bag, the way Lucy's gaze lingered on the upper windows. The butler, as impassive as ever, ushered them into the foyer. The metallic scent was fainter today, but still present, mingling with the polish of the wood and the faint mustiness of old stone. Hawthorne greeted them with his usual charm, his silver hair gleaming under the chandelier. "Welcome back," he said, his voice warm but his eyes sharp. "I'm delighted you've all returned. The manor has stories to tell, and I think you'll find them illuminating." He led them through the ground floor, pointing out architectural details with the ease of a man who had studied the house's history. The drawing room, with its velvet drapes and ornate fireplace. The library, its shelves heavy with leather-bound tomes. The conservatory, where exotic plants thrived in the humid air. Each room was a stage, and Hawthorne played his role to perfection, but Miss Marple's attention was elsewhere. She noted the locked doors they passed, the faint scuff marks on the floor near a side staircase, the way the butler's shadow seemed to follow them at a distance. In the library, Hawthorne paused, his hand resting on a glass case that held a single book. Its cover was dark, embossed with a symbol Miss Marple recognized at once. The Ouroboros, a snake devouring its own tail. "This," he said, his voice dropping to a reverent tone, "is one of my prized possessions. A manuscript from the 16th century, said to contain knowledge lost to time. Its previous owners met unfortunate ends." The guests leaned closer, drawn by the allure of mystery. Dolly gasped, her hand fluttering to her chest. "Unfortunate ends? You mean they died?" Hawthorne's smile was enigmatic. "Let's just say the book has a history, but I assure you it's perfectly safe. Here." Miss Marple studied the case, noting the heavy lock and the faint scratches around its edges, as if someone had tried to pry it open. She thought of the crates, the rumours of strange symbols, the thud from upstairs. The book was a clue, but to what? And why was Hawthorne so eager to show it to them? As they moved to the upper floors, the atmosphere grew heavier, the air thick with the scent of dust and time. The corridors were lined with portraits, their subjects staring down with disapproval. Hawthorne led them past guest rooms and a locked study, his commentary growing vaguer as they ascended. Miss Marple's notebook remained in her bag, but her mind was recording everything. The creak of a floorboard under Lucy's step, the way Dr. Haydock's eyes darted to a shadowed alcove, the faint hum of a draught from a sealed window. At the end of a long hallway, Hawthorne stopped before a door unlike the others. It was heavy oak, reinforced with iron bands, and its lock was new, gleaming against the weathered wood. "This," he said, "is where I store my more delicate acquisitions." The crates you've no doubt heard about are here, though I'm afraid they're not ready for viewing just yet." Lucy raised an eyebrow. "Not ready, or not meant for us?" Hawthorne chuckled, but there was a tightness to it. "Patience, Miss Islesbarrow. All in good time." Miss Marple's gaze lingered on the door, her thoughts racing. The thud had come from this floor, she was certain. Was it from this room? And if so, what was inside those crates that required such a fortress-like barrier? The tour continued, but the mood had shifted. The guests were quieter now, their earlier curiosity tempered by unease. As they descended to the ground floor, Miss Marple noticed a figure in the garden, a man stooped and silent, tending to the roses. The gardener, she presumed, the one who spoke no English. His movements were methodical, but there was something in his posture, a watchfulness that belied his task. Back in the drawing-room, Hawthorne offered tea, his charm returning as if the locked door had never existed. The guests accepted, though their conversation was strained. Dolly chattered about the manners. History, Dr. Haydock asked pointed questions about the book, and Lucy stared out the window, her thoughts unreadable. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her eyes drifting to the butler, who stood by the door, his hands clasped behind his back. Then, as the clock struck noon, there was a sound, a faint rhythmic tapping, like fingers on glass. It came from the window, and every head turned. The gardener was there, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, his hand pressed against the pane. He tapped once, twice, then vanished into the garden, leaving only the echo of the sound. Hawthorne's smile faltered, but he recovered quickly. "The gardener?" he said, waving a hand. "A bit eccentric, but harmless." Miss Marple sat down, her cup, her heart quickening. Harmless, perhaps, but deliberate. The tapping was no accident. It was a signal, a message, and she intended to decipher it. As the guests prepared to leave, Hawthorne made a final announcement. "I'd like to invite you all to return tomorrow evening," he said. "A small gathering, nothing formal. I have something to share, something that will, I believe, change how you see this manor." The invitation hung in the air, heavy with promise. Dolly accepted eagerly. Dr. Haydock nodded curtly, and Lucy gave a non-committal smile. Miss Marple merely inclined her head, her mind already racing ahead. Another gathering, another move in Hawthorne's game. She would be there watching, listening, knitting the threads together. As she walked home, the mist had lifted, but the manor's shadow seemed to follow her. She thought of the locked door, the Ouroboros, the gardener's tapping. Each was a clue, a piece of the puzzle. And somewhere in the heart of Hawthorne Manor was a secret that someone, or something, was desperate to protect. By the time she reached her cottage, Miss Marple was certain of one thing. The manor was no mere house. It was a stage, and the drama was only beginning. She would return tomorrow, her needles at the ready, prepared to unravel the next layer of Reginald Hawthorne's enigma. Chapter 4. Whispers at Tea. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across St. Mary Mead, turning the village into a patchwork of light and secrets. Miss Jane Marple sat in her drawing-room, her knitting needles clicking softly as she worked on her scarf, now a cascade of soft blue wool. The morning's tour of Hawthorne Manor lingered in her thoughts, each moment a thread in the intricate tapestry she was weaving. The locked oak door, the Ouroboros embossed book, the gardener's eerie tapping, they were clues, deliberate and tantalizing, but their meaning remained elusive. Yet Miss Marple was patient. Patterns emerged in time, and she had a knack for coaxing them into view. Her cottage was a haven of quiet, its lace curtains filtering the sunlight into delicate patterns on the rug. But today, the quiet was about to be disrupted. Dolly Bantry had promised to visit for tea, no doubt bursting with theories about the manor and its enigmatic owner. Miss Marple welcomed the interruption. Dolly's chatter, though often scattered, was a goldmine of village gossip, and gossip, as Miss Marple well knew, was the lifeblood of truth. At precisely 3 o'clock, a knock announced Dolly's arrival. She swept in, her hat adorned with a rather ambitious feather, her face alight with the kind of excitement that only a mystery could spark. "Jane, I've been thinking about that manor all day," she declared, settling into an armchair with a rustle of skirts. "It's positively Gothic, don't you think? That thud, those crates, and now this new invitation for tonight. What is Mr. Hawthorne playing at?" Miss Marple poured tea, her movements deliberate as she handed Dolly a cup. "He's certainly a man who enjoys an audience," she said, her tone mild, but her eyes sharp. "But I suspect his invitations are less about hospitality and more about observation." Dolly's eyes widened. "Observation? You mean he's watching us? Oh, Jane, you do have the most thrilling ideas. But why us? I'm nobody special, and neither is the vicar, bless him. Though I suppose Dr. Haydock has his secrets. Doctors always do. And Lucy, well, she's sharp as a tack, isn't she?" Miss Marple smiled, letting Dolly's words flow. She sipped her tea, noting the faint tremor in Dolly's hand, the way her gaze darted to the window as if expecting to see the manor looming beyond. Fear, curiosity, or perhaps a mix of both. Dolly was caught in the web of Hawthorne's mystery, just as they all were. As they chatted, Miss Marple steered the conversation gently, like a shepherd guiding a flock. "What did you make of the gardener, Dolly? His tapping at the window was rather peculiar, wasn't it?" Dolly shuddered, setting her cup down with a clink. "Peculiar is putting it mildly. He gave me the creeps, Jane. Standing there like a ghost, tapping away and then vanishing. I heard from Mrs. Price at the grocer's that he's foreign, Romanian, or some such, and doesn't speak a word to anyone. She says he was seen digging in the manor's garden at midnight last week, though goodness knows what for." Miss Marple's needles paused just for a moment. Digging at midnight. Another thread, bright and intriguing. She recalled the gardener's stooped figure, his watchful stillness. Was he merely tending roses, or was he guarding, or hiding, something in the manor's grounds? She made a mental note to inquire further, perhaps through Lily, who had a way of coaxing gossip from even the most tight-lipped villagers. The conversation turned to the other guests. Dolly, ever eager to speculate, had opinions on them all. "Dr. Haydock was awfully quiet today, don't you think? Kept clutching that bag of his like it held the crown jewels. And the vicar, well, he's sweet, but I swear he didn't notice a thing, prattling on about stained glass. Lucy, though, she was watching everything. I saw her staring at that locked door like she wanted to pick the lock herself." Miss Marple nodded, her mind cataloguing each detail. Lucy's curiosity was no surprise. The young woman had a reputation for solving problems, practical and otherwise. But Dr. Haydock's tension was interesting, as was his attachment to his medical bag. Was it merely professional habit, or was there something inside he didn't want seen? As for the vicar, his obliviousness could be genuine, or a carefully crafted mask. She had known clergymen before who hid sharp minds behind bumbling exteriors. The tea grew cold as Dolly's theories grew wilder, veering from buried treasure to international espionage. Miss Marple listened, interjecting only to nudge the conversation toward specifics. Had Dolly noticed the scratches on the book's case? Did she recall the butler's accent? Each question was a probe, gentle but precise, and Dolly, unaware of her role as informant, answered freely. Then, as the clock struck 4, there was a knock at the door. Miss Marple rose, expecting Lily with the post, but instead found Lucy Eilesbarrow on her doorstep, her face pale and her eyes bright with urgency. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice low, "I need to speak with you. It's about the manor, and something I saw this afternoon." Dolly gasped, nearly spilling her tea. "Oh, Lucy, don't tell me it's another mystery. Come in, come in." Miss Marple ushered Lucy inside, her calm demeanour masking the quickening of her pulse. Lucy was not one for dramatics, which made her urgency all the more compelling. They settled in the drawing-room, Lucy perched on the edge of a chair, her hands clasped tightly. "I went back to the manor after the tour," Lucy began, glancing at the door as if to ensure they were alone. "I know I shouldn't have, but I couldn't stop thinking about that locked door. I thought if I could just get a closer look." Dolly leaned forward, her feather bobbing. "You didn't break in, did you?" Lucy shook her head, a faint smile flickering. "No, nothing so bold, but I walked around the grounds, near the east wing where that door is. The gardener was there again, digging by the rose beds. He didn't see me, but I saw him pull something from the soil, something small, wrapped in cloth. He looked around, like he was afraid of being caught, and then hid it in his coat." Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm, the soft click, a counterpoint to the tension in the room. "Did you see what it was?" she asked, her voice as gentle as a breeze. "No," Lucy admitted, "but it wasn't a tool or a plant. It was deliberate. And then I heard voices from the manor, Hawthorne and the butler, I think. They were arguing, though I couldn't make out the words. I left before they spotted me. But Miss Marple, something's wrong at that house. I can feel it." Dolly clutched her cup, her eyes wide. "Arguing? Oh, Jane, this is getting positively sinister. What do you think it means?" Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her mind racing. A cloth-wrapped object, an argument, the gardener's, midnight digging. It was a knot of clues, each one tightening the web around Hawthorne Manor. She thought of the Ouroboros, its endless cycle of secrets, and wondered what the gardener had unearthed. A key, a relic, or something far more dangerous. "Thank you, Lucy," she said, her tone warm but firm. "You were right to tell me, but we must be careful. The manor is no place for reckless curiosity." Lucy nodded, though her eyes gleamed with determination. "I know, but I'm going to that gathering tonight. I want to see what Hawthorne's planning." "As will I," Miss Marple said, her smile serene, but her thoughts anything but. The gathering was another move in Hawthorne's game, and she intended to play her part with care. After Lucy left, Dolly lingered, her earlier excitement now tinged with nerves. "Jane, you don't think we're in danger, do you? I mean, it's just a manor, not a haunted castle." Miss Marple patted her hand, her touch as comforting as her words were measured. "Danger, Dolly, often wears a charming face. But don't worry. We'll go together tonight, and we'll keep our eyes open." As Dolly bustled off, promising to return for the evening's outing, Miss Marple sat alone, her tea forgotten. She thought of Lucy's story, of the gardener's secret, of Hawthorne's calculated charm. The manor was a puzzle, its pieces scattered across locked doors and shadowed gardens. But puzzles, she knew, had solutions, and she was determined to find this one. The clock ticked toward evening, and Miss Marple prepared for the gathering. She chose a dress of soft grey, its simplicity a canvas for her unobtrusive presence. Her notebook went into her handbag, along with a small magnifying glass, a tool she rarely used but kept for moments like these. The manor's shadow was growing, longer, its secrets pressing closer, and she would need all her wits to navigate what lay ahead. As she locked her cottage door, the village was quiet, its cottages glowing with lamplight, but Miss Marple's thoughts were on the manor, its walls whispering of treasures and treachery. Tonight she would listen closely, her needles ready to weave the next thread in the tapestry of Reginald Hawthorne's mystery. Chapter 5. The Locked Study. The evening sky over St. Mary Mead was a bruise of purple and gold, the last light of day fading as Miss Jane Marple and Dolly Bantry made their way to Hawthorne Manor. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of wood smoke and the faint tang of the manor's ivy-clad walls. Miss Marple's steps were steady, her grey dress blending into the twilight, but her mind was alight with anticipation. The gathering tonight, promised by Reginald Hawthorne as a revelation, was another piece in the puzzle that had begun with a thud and groan with each cryptic clue. The Ouroboros, the gardener's secret, the locked oak door. She carried her handbag, its contents unremarkable, save for the notebook and magnifying glass, tools as vital to her as a detective's revolver. Dolly, clutching her arm, was a bundle of nerves and excitement. "Jane, I keep thinking about what Lucy said," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the crunch of gravel. "That gardener, digging up something in the dark, it's like something out of a novel. Do you think it's treasure? Or evidence of some dreadful crime?" Jane Marple's smile was serene, but her eyes scanned the shadows. "Time will tell, Dolly. For now, let's keep our wits about us. Mr. Hawthorne has a flair for the dramatic, and I suspect tonight will be no exception." The manor loomed ahead, its windows aglow with a warmth that belied the chill Miss Marple felt in her bones. The memory of Lucy's tale, the cloth-wrapped object, the overheard argument, had sharpened her senses. She thought of the butler's tense posture, the dust on Hawthorne's cuff, the tapping at the window. Each was a thread, and tonight she hoped to weave them closer to a pattern. At the door, the butler greeted them with his usual impassivity, though Miss Marple noted a faint crease in his brow, a crack in his marble facade. "Good evening, Miss Marple, Mrs. Bantry," he said, his accent smooth but faintly foreign. "Mr. Hawthorne awaits you in the drawing-room." The foyer was as grand as before, but the metallic scent was stronger now, sharp enough to catch in her throat. She glanced at the staircase, its curve leading to the upper floors where the thud had sounded 2 nights ago. The locked oak door, she suspected, was up there, guarding secrets Hawthorne was not yet ready to share. In the drawing-room, the other guests were already gathered. Dr. Haydock, his medical bag at his feet, Mr. Clement, the vicar, clutching a glass of sherry, and Lucy Islesbarrow, standing by the fireplace, her expression a mix of curiosity and caution. The air was thick with expectation, the kind that precedes a storm. Miss Marple took her seat, her hands folded neatly, her eyes missing nothing. Hawthorne entered with the grace of a stage actor, his silver hair catching the firelight. "My dear friends," he said, his voice rich with promise, "thank you for returning. Tonight, I wish to share something extraordinary, a glimpse into the heart of this manor and its history." Dolly leaned toward Miss Marple, whispering, "Here it comes, Jane. I can feel it." Hawthorne's gaze swept the room, lingering. She noted the way his fingers tightened on the arm of his chair, the brief flicker of something, nervousness, calculation, in his eyes. He spoke of the manor's past, of its builders, a family whose wealth came from trade, and whose downfall was shrouded in rumour. "They left behind more than stone and mortar," he said, his tone almost reverent. "They left a legacy, one I've spent years uncovering. Tonight, I'll show you a piece of it." He led them from the drawing-room, not to the library or conservatory, but up the grand staircase. Miss Marple's heart quickened. The upper floors, where the thud had sounded, where the locked oak door stood. She watched the others. Dr. Haydock's jaw was tight, Lucy's steps were measured, and the vicar seemed oblivious, murmuring about the woodwork. Dolly clung to her arm, her whispers a constant hum of speculation. They stopped before a door, not the heavy oak one, but another, smaller and less imposing, though its lock was just as new. "This," Hawthorne said, producing a key with a flourish, "is my study, a place of reflection and discovery." The door swung open, revealing a room that was both scholarly and strange. Books lined the walls, their spines cracked with age, but it was the objects scattered across tables that drew the eye. A brass astrolabe, a jade figurine, a dagger with a hilt carved like a serpent. At the centre was a desk, and on it a small wooden box, its lid etched with the Ouroboros. Miss Marple's breath caught. The symbol again, coiled and eternal. Hawthorne lifted the box, his movements deliberate. "This," he said, "is said to contain a relic of the manor's first owners. A key, perhaps, or a token. Its purpose is lost, but its power is not. I've invited you here to witness its opening." The room seemed to shrink, the air heavy with anticipation. Miss Marple's mind raced. A relic? A key? Or something else? Something tied to the crates, the gardener's secret, the thud? She studied the box, noting the faint scratches around the lock, the way Hawthorne's fingers trembled, almost imperceptibly, as he held it. Dr. Haydock spoke first, his voice gruff. "Why us? Why show this to a group of strangers?" Hawthorne's smile was enigmatic. "Because you're not strangers, Doctor. Each of you has a connection to this village, to its history. And history, as you'll see, has a way of demanding its due." Before anyone could press him further, there was a sound, a sharp, metallic click from the hallway. The guests froze, their eyes darting to the door. Miss Marple's hand tightened on her handbag, her senses alert. It was not the thud from before, but something else, something closer. The butler appeared, his face pale, his voice urgent. "Sir, you're needed downstairs, immediately." Hawthorne's expression flickered, a crack in his composure. "Now?" he asked, the box still in his hands. "Now," the butler said, and there was no mistaking the edge in his tone. Hawthorne set the box down, his smile returning but strained. "Forgive me," he said, "a small matter. Please, make yourselves comfortable. I'll return shortly." He left, the butler at his heels, and the door clicked shut behind them. The guests exchanged glances, the silence thick with unspoken questions. Dolly clutched Miss Marple's arm. "Jane, what was that? It sounded like a lock or a gun." "It's a gun," Lucy said, her voice steady but her eyes on the box. "But something's happening. Did you see Hawthorne's face? He wasn't expecting this." Miss Marple nodded, her mind cataloguing every detail. The click, the butler's urgency, the box left unguarded. She rose, her movements slow but purposeful, and approached the desk. The others watched, their breaths held, as she leaned over the box, her magnifying glass in hand. The scratches were fresh, she noted, and there was a faint residue. Dust, perhaps, or something finer like ash. "Jane, what are you doing?" Dolly hissed, her voice a mix of fear and awe. "Observing," Miss Marple said, her tone as calm as a summer afternoon. "This box is more than it seems, and I suspect Mr. Hawthorne knows it." She stepped back, her gaze sweeping the room. The objects on the tables, the books, the locked door at the far end, each was a clue, a piece of the manor's shadow. She thought of Lucy's story, the gardener's cloth-wrapped object, the argument she'd overheard, and now this box with its arobros and its secrets. "We should leave," Dr. Haydock said, his voice low. "This isn't our business." "Oh, but it is," Lucy countered, her eyes blazing. "He invited us here, showed us this. He wants us involved. The question is why." The vicar, silent until now, cleared his throat. "Perhaps it's a test, a moral one, to see what we'll do." Miss Marple's lips twitched, a ghost of a smile. A test, indeed, but whose? Hawthorne's or someone else's? She was about to speak when another sound came. A soft, deliberate tap, like the gardener's signal at the window. It came from the locked door at the room's far end, and it sent a shiver through the group. Dolly gasped. "It's him, the gardener. He's in there." Lucy moved toward the door, but Miss Marple's voice stopped her. "Not yet," she said, her tone firm. "We don't know what's behind that door, or who. We wait for Mr. Hawthorne." They waited, the tapping fading into silence, the box gleaming on the desk like a challenge. Miss Marple's mind worked, knitting threads into patterns. The click, the box, the tapping, the manor's history. She thought of the crates, the thud, the dust on Hawthorne's cuff, and she thought of the guests, each with their own secrets, their own reasons for being here. When Hawthorne returned, his face was composed, but his eyes were darker, as if a storm brewed behind them. "My apologies," he said, picking up the box. "A misunderstanding with the staff. Shall we continue?" But Miss Marple saw the truth in the set of his jaw, the way his fingers gripped the box. The interruption had shaken him, and the box, whatever it held, was at the heart of it. She smiled, her expression as gentle as ever, but her mind was a blade, cutting through the manor's shadows. The gathering ended soon after, the box unopened, the relic unseen. Hawthorne promised another meeting, his charm intact, but his urgency palpable. As the guests left, Miss Marple lingered, her eyes on the study door, now silent. She thought of the tapping, the gardener, the box, and she knew, with a certainty that settled in her bones, that the manor's secrets were no longer content to stay hidden. As she walked home with Dolly, the night was alive with whispers, of wind, of leaves, of something older, deeper. Miss Marple's needles would have much to weave before this was done, and she was ready for the task. Chapter 6. A Stranger's Tale. The morning mist hung low over St. Mary Mead, shrouding the village in a veil of secrecy that mirrored the enigma of Hawthorne Manor. Miss Jane Marple sat at her breakfast table, a slice of toast untouched, as she pored over her notebook. The pages were filled with neat, precise notes. The Ouroboros symbol, the gardener's tapping, the locked study, the unopened box. Each was a thread in the tapestry she was weaving, but the pattern remained elusive, its edges frayed by questions. Who was Reginald Hawthorne, really? And what lay behind the manor's locked doors? Last night's gathering had ended abruptly, the promise of the box's contents left unfulfilled, the metallic click, the butler's urgency, the faint tapping from the locked door. They had stirred the guests into a quiet frenzy of suspicion. Miss Marple had walked home with Dolly Bantry's chatter ringing in her ears, but her own thoughts were louder, piecing together the manor's shadows. She knew one thing for certain. The game was escalating, and she needed to be ready for its next move. As she sipped her tea, a knock at the door broke her reverie. It was Lily, her maid, her face flushed with the kind of excitement that only fresh gossip could ignite. "Miss Marple, you'll never believe it," Lily said, clutching a basket of laundry as if it were a shield. "There's a stranger in the village. Arrived this morning on the early train, all the way from London, they say. He's at the Blue Boar, asking questions about the manor, and about Mr. Hawthorne." Miss Marple's eyes sharpened, though her smile remained gentle. "A stranger, Lily? What sort of questions? Lily leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Mrs. Price at the post office heard him talking to the innkeeper. Said he's looking for someone, a man who owes him something or knows something. He mentioned a book, Miss and Crates, and he was ever so particular about who's been to the manor lately. Mrs. Price thinks he's a detective, or maybe a thief." Miss Marple set her cup down, her mind racing. A stranger asking about the manor, the book, the crates. It was no coincidence. She thought of the Ouroboros, its endless cycle of secrets, and wondered if this newcomer was a new thread or a snag that could unravel everything. "Thank you, Lily," she said. "If you hear more, do let me know." As Lily bustled off, Miss Marple made a decision. The Blue Boar was a short walk, and a stranger in St. Mary Mead was too significant to ignore. She donned her coat and hat, her appearance as unassuming as ever, but her handbag held her notebook and magnifying glass, ready for whatever clues awaited. The Blue Boar was the heart of village gossip, its low ceilings and smoky air thick with whispered tales. As Miss Marple entered, she was greeted by the familiar hum of conversation. Farmers discussing crops, shopkeepers trading rumours, and the innkeeper, Mr. Harrow, polishing glasses with a knowing grin. She took a seat near the window, ordering a pot of tea, her eyes scanning the room. The stranger was easy to spot. He sat alone in a corner, a man of middle age with a lean frame and a face weathered by more than time. His suit was well cut but slightly worn, and his hands, resting on a newspaper, bore the faint scars of a life not spent behind a desk. He was reading, but his gaze flicked up every few seconds, as if cataloguing the room's occupants. Miss Marple recognized the look. A hunter, or perhaps the hunted. She sipped her tea, her posture relaxed, but her mind alert. She had seen men like this before. Private investigators, debt collectors, or worse, men with secrets as heavy as the crates at the manor. She needed to know more, but approaching him directly would be too bold. Instead, she turned to Mr. Harrow, who was never shy about sharing what he'd overheard. "Good morning, Mr. Harrow," she said, her voice warm. "I hear you've a new guest. From London, is it?" Mr. Harrow's eyes gleamed, eager to spill. His tale, "I, Miss Marple, calls himself Mr. Vincent Cole. Arrived this morning, all business. Asked about the manor, Mr. Hawthorne, and who's been visiting. Seemed mighty interested in that book Hawthorne's been showing off. I told him what I know, which ain't much, but he's been poking around ever since." Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of polite curiosity. "A book, you say? How curious! Did he mention why he's here?" "Not in so many words," Mr. Harrow said, lowering his voice. "But he's got a look about him, like he's chasing something, or someone. Said he's staying a few days, maybe longer. Mrs. Price reckons he's trouble, but I say he's just another city type, lost in our little village." Miss Marple thanked him, her mind already weaving Vincent Cole into the tapestry. A man from London, asking about the manor and the book, arriving just as Hawthorne's gatherings grew stranger. It was a thread she couldn't ignore. She glanced at Cole, who was now writing in a small notebook, his pen moving with quick, precise strokes. What was he recording? Names, clues, or something more dangerous? As she finished her tea, the door swung open, and Lucy Islesbarrow entered, her face flushed from the morning chill. She spotted Miss Marple and hurried over, her eyes darting to Cole before she sat down. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice low, "I was hoping to find you. Something's happened. Something you need to know." Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her smile remained serene. "What is it, Lucy? You look troubled." Lucy leaned closer, her words barely above a whisper. "I went back to the manor this morning. Don't scold me. I couldn't help it. I wanted to see if the gardener was digging again. He wasn't, but I found something else. Near the rose beds, half buried in the dirt, there was a piece of paper. It had writing on it. Strange writing, like a code. And that snake symbol again." Miss Marple's needles, had they been in her hands, would have paused. The Ouroboros again. "Did you keep it?" she asked. Lucy shook her head. "I didn't dare. I heard someone coming, the butler, I think, and I left." "But Miss Marple, it wasn't just the paper. The ground there, it's been disturbed, like someone's been digging regularly. And I swear I saw a shadow in one of the manor's windows, watching me. Miss Marple's mind raced, knitting Lucy's discovery into the pattern. A coded paper, the Ouroboros, disturbed earth, a watcher in the manor. It was a knot of clues, each one tightening the mystery. She thought of Vincent Cole, sitting mere feet away, his presence no longer a coincidence, but a catalyst. Was he connected to the paper, the digging, the shadow? Or was he, like them, chasing the manor's secrets? Before she could press Lucy further, Cole rose, folding his newspaper with deliberate care. He glanced their way, his eyes lingering on Lucy for a fraction too long, then left the inn, his steps silent on the worn floorboards. Miss Marple noted the tension in Lucy's shoulders, the way her fingers tightened on her cup. "He knows something," Lucy murmured. "I can feel it." "Perhaps," Miss Marple said, her tone measured. "But we must be careful, Lucy. Strangers bring questions, but they also bring danger." They sat in silence for a moment, the inn's chatter a distant hum. Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the evening ahead. Hawthorne had promised another gathering, though he'd been vague about its purpose. Would Vincent Cole be there? An uninvited guest in the manor's drama? Or was he working in the shadows, like the gardener, digging for truths best left buried? They left the Blue Boar. Miss Marple glanced at the manor in the distance, its chimneys piercing the mist. She thought of the locked study, the unopened box, the tapping door, and now a stranger's tale woven into the fabric of St. Mary Mead. She would need to tread carefully, her needles sharp and her eyes sharper, to unravel the secrets that bound them all. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple prepared for the evening, choosing a dress of deep navy, its simplicity a shield for her keen observation. Her notebook was filling quickly, but the pattern was still incomplete. Vincent Cole, she decided, was a thread she would follow, but not yet. Tonight at the manor, she would watch and listen, letting the manor's whispers guide her to the truth. As she locked her door, the village was quiet, its secrets hidden in the mist. But Miss Marple knew that silence was deceptive. The stranger's tale was only beginning, and with it, the manor's shadow grew darker, its secrets closer to the surface. She was ready to meet them, one careful stitch at a time. Chapter 7. Clues in the Garden. The sun hung low over St. Mary Mead, painting the village in hues of amber and shadow, as Miss Jane Marple prepared for another evening at Hawthorne Manor. Her cottage was quiet, save for the soft tick of the clock and the occasional chirp of a sparrow outside. Her notebook lay open on the table, its pages dense with observations. Vincent Cole's arrival, Lucy's coded paper, the unopened box in the locked study. Each was a thread in the tapestry of the manor's mystery, but the pattern was still incomplete, its edges blurred by the secrets that seemed to multiply with every visit. The stranger, Vincent Cole, had added a new layer of intrigue. His questions about the manor, the book, and Hawthorne himself suggested he was no casual visitor. Miss Marple thought of his weathered hands, his watchful eyes, and wondered if he was a hunter or prey in this unfolding drama. Lucy's discovery of the coded paper, buried near the rosebeds, was equally troubling. The Ouroboros symbol, the disturbed earth, the shadow in the window. They pointed to something hidden, something the manor's walls and gardens were guarding fiercely. Tonight's gathering at the manor was another move in Reginald Hawthorne's game. though its purpose remained unclear. Miss Marple dressed carefully, choosing a dress of soft green, its colour blending with the twilight. Her handbag held her notebook, magnifying glass, and a small torch, a precaution inspired by the manor's dark corridors and the tapping that had haunted the last gathering. She was ready to observe, to listen, to weave the next thread into the pattern. As she stepped outside, Dolly Bantry was waiting, her hat adorned with a new ribbon that fluttered in the breeze. "Jane, I'm positively on edge," Dolly said, linking arms with her. "That stranger at the Blue Boar, Lucy's story about the paper, it's all too much. Do you think we'll see that box open tonight? Or will there be another interruption?" Miss Marple's smile was serene, but her eyes were sharp. "Mr. Hawthorne is a man of surprises, Dolly, but surprises often reveal more than they conceal. We'll see what tonight brings." The walk to the manor was quiet, the village settling into the hush of evening. The manor's silhouette loomed ahead, its chimneys stark against the fading sky. Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the garden, where Lucy had seen the gardener digging, where the coded paper had been found. Gardens, she knew, were places of beauty and deception, hiding secrets beneath their blooms. She resolved to examine the rosebeds herself, if the opportunity arose. At the manor, the butler greeted them with his usual composure, though Miss Marple noted a faint sheen of sweat on his brow, unusual for a man so controlled. The metallic scent was present again, sharper now, mingling with the polish of the foyer. She glanced at the staircase, its shadows beckoning, but followed the butler to the drawing-room, where the other guests awaited. Dr. Haydock stood by the window, his medical bag at his feet, his expression guarded. Mr. Clement, the vicar, was sipping tea, his face serene but his fingers tapping nervously on his saucer. Lucy Islesbarrow paced near the fireplace, her eyes darting to the door as if expecting an uninvited guest. The air was thick with tension, the memory of the locked study and the unopened box hanging over them like a storm cloud. Hawthorne entered, his silver hair gleaming, his smile as polished as ever. "Good evening," he said, his voice warm, but his eyes scanning the room with a predator's focus. "I'm delighted you've returned. Tonight we'll venture beyond the manors, walls, to the gardens, where beauty hides its own mysteries." Dolly's eyes widened, and she clutched Miss Marple's arm. "The gardens! Oh, Jane, that's where Lucy saw the gardener digging." Miss Marple nodded, her mind already racing. The gardens! A bold choice, given Lucy's discovery. Was Hawthorne aware of the coded paper, the disturbed earth? Or was this another test, a way to gauge their reactions? She thought of Vincent Cole, still absent but looming in her thoughts. Would he appear tonight, a shadow among the roses? Hawthorne led them through the conservatory, its glass walls steaming with the breath of exotic plants, and into the gardens. The air was cool, scented with lavender and the faint musk of turned soil. The rosebeds, meticulously tended, glowed under the soft light of lanterns strung along the paths. The gardener was nowhere to be seen, but Miss Marple felt his presence, as if his shadow lingered in the clipped hedges. Hawthorne gestured to the roses, his tone almost poetic. These gardens were planted by the manor's first owners, a family whose passion for beauty was matched only by their secrecy. They hid their treasures here in plain sight, trusting the earth to keep their counsel. Lucy's eyes narrowed, and Miss Marple caught the flicker of suspicion in her gaze. Treasures. The word echoed the promises of the locked study. The unopened box. She thought of the coded paper, its Ouroboros symbol, and wondered if the garden held more than roses. As they walked, Hawthorne pointed out features: a marble fountain, a maze of yew hedges, a stone bench carved with intricate patterns. But Miss Marple's attention was on the rose beds, their soil dark and freshly turned. She lagged behind, pretending to admire a bloom, and knelt to examine the earth. Her fingers brushed the soil, cool and loose, and she spotted a faint irregularity, a patch where the dirt was packed differently, as if something had been buried and unearthed. She rose quickly, her heart quickening, but not before Lucy noticed. "Find something?" Lucy whispered, her voice low. "And not yet," Miss Marple murmured, her eyes on Hawthorne, who was now leading the group toward the maze. "But the garden is speaking, Lucy. We must listen." The maze was a labyrinth of green, its paths twisting into darkness. Hawthorne's voice carried over the hedges, recounting a tale of the manor's founders, their wealth, their downfall. But Miss Marple was distracted by a sound, a faint rustle, like footsteps on gravel, coming from the rosebeds behind them. She turned, but the lanterns cast only shadows, and the gardener, if he was there, remained hidden. Dr. Haydock, walking nearby, muttered under his breath, "This is nonsense. Gardens, treasures, what's he playing at?" Miss Marple's lips twitched. "Perhaps he's inviting us to dig, Doctor. Metaphorically, of course." He shot her a glance, his eyes narrowing, but said nothing. She noted his tension, the way his hand hovered near his bag. What was he guarding, or fearing? As they emerged from the maze, Hawthorne stopped by the fountain, its water glinting under the moonlight. "I've one more surprise," he said, his smile enigmatic, "a demonstration, if you will, of the garden's secrets." He knelt by the fountain, his fingers tracing a carving, a serpent, its tail in its mouth. The Ouroboros again. With a soft click, a panel in the fountain's base slid open, revealing a small compartment. Inside was a velvet pouch, its contents hidden but heavy. Hawthorne lifted it, his eyes gleaming. "A token," he said, "from the manor's past. Proof that the earth keeps its promises." The guests leaned closer, their breaths held. Dolly gasped, her hand fluttering to her chest. "Is it gold? Jewels?" Hawthorne's smile widened, but he didn't open the pouch. "Patience, Mrs. Bantry. Some secrets are best savoured." Before anyone could press him, there was a sound. A sharp, deliberate crack, like a branch snapping underfoot. It came from the rosebeds, and every head turned. Miss Marple's torch was in her hand, its beam cutting through the darkness. But it revealed only petals and shadows. The gardener, she thought, or someone else. Vincent Cole, perhaps. Hawthorne's composure faltered, his hand tightening on the pouch. "The wind," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Let's return inside. The night grows cold." They followed him back to the manor, the pouch unopened, the crack unexplained. Miss Marple's mind was ablaze, knitting the night's clues into the tapestry. The disturbed soil, the hidden compartment, the Ouroboros, the crack. She thought of Lucy's coded paper, the gardener's digging, Cole's questions, and she thought of Hawthorne, his charm a mask for something deeper, something desperate. In the drawing-room, tea was served, but the mood was strained. Lucy whispered to Miss Marple, her voice urgent. "That crack! It wasn't the wind! Someone was watching us!" Miss Marple nodded, her eyes on Hawthorne, who was now chatting with the vicar, the pouch tucked into his pocket. "I know, Lucy, and I suspect they saw more than we did." As the evening ended, Hawthorne made no mention of another gathering, but his parting words were heavy with promise. "The manor has more to reveal," he said, his gaze lingering on Miss Marple. "I trust you'll return to see it." She inclined her head, her smile as gentle as ever, but her mind was a storm of questions. The garden had spoken, its clues buried in soil and shadow, and she would dig deeper, her needles sharp and her patience endless. As she walked home with Dolly, the night was alive with whispers, of leaves, of secrets, of something stirring in, out at the manor's heart. Miss Marple knew the game was far from over, and the clues in the garden were only the beginning. She would return, ready to unravel the next thread in Reginald Hawthorne's enigma, one careful stitch at a time. Chapter 8. The Midnight Visitor. The night wrapped St. Mary Mead in a cloak of silence, broken only by the occasional hoot of an owl or the rustle of leaves in the wind. Miss Jane Marple sat in her cottage, the glow of a single lamp casting soft shadows across her drawing-room. Her knitting lay idle in her lap, the scarf forgotten as her mind worked through the events of the evening at Hawthorne Manor. The garden's clues, the disturbed soil, the hidden compartment in the fountain, the velvet pouch with its unseen contents, had deepened the mystery, each one a thread in the tapestry she was painstakingly weaving. But it was the sharp crack in the rose beds, like a foot snapping a branch, that lingered most. A discordant note in Reginald Hawthorne's carefully orchestrated performance. Her notebook lay open on the table, its pages filled with precise observations, the Ouroboros symbol, Vincent Cole's probing questions, Lucy's coded paper, the gardener's watchful presence. The manor was a puzzle, its pieces scattered across locked doors, shadowed gardens, and now the village itself with Cole's arrival stirring the pot. Miss Marple knew the game was shifting, the stakes rising with each gathering. Tonight's tour of the garden had revealed more than Hawthorne intended, and she suspected the crack in the rose beds was no accident but a signal, much like the gardener's tapping. As the clock struck 11, she rose to make tea, her movements slow but deliberate. The village was asleep, its cottages dark, but her mind was far from restful. She thought of the velvet pouch, heavy in Hawthorne's hand, and the way his smile had faltered at the crack. Was it fear she'd seen in his eyes, or calculation? And who had been watching from the shadows? Vincent Cole, the gardener, or someone else entirely? She was pouring boiling water into the teapot when a sound stopped her. A soft, deliberate knock at her door. It was faint, almost hesitant, but unmistakable in the stillness of the night. Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her face remained serene. Visitors at midnight were rare in St. Mary Mead, and in the midst of the manor's mystery, such a visit was no coincidence. She set the kettle down and moved to the door, her torch in one hand, her magnifying glass tucked into her pocket. Peering through the lace curtain, she saw a figure shrouded in shadow, their face obscured by a hat pulled low. The knock came again, sharper this time, and she made a decision. Opening the door just a crack, she said, "Good evening. To what do I owe this late visit?" The figure stepped into the lamplight, revealing Vincent Cole, his weathered face pale but resolute. His eyes darted past her, scanning the room as if expecting an ambush. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice low and urgent, "I need to speak with you. It's about the manor and Hawthorne. May I come in?" Miss Marple hesitated, her instincts weighing caution against curiosity. Cole was a stranger, his motives unclear, but his presence at her door, at this hour, was a thread she couldn't ignore. She stepped aside, gesturing to the armchair by the fire. "Very well, Mr. Cole, but I warn you, I'm not easily swayed by tales spun in the dark." He nodded, removing his hat as he entered, his movements tense but controlled. The room felt smaller with him in it, his presence like a storm cloud on the horizon. Miss Marple poured tea, offering him a cup, which he accepted with a curt nod. She settled into her chair, her hands folded neatly, her eyes missing nothing. The faint tremor in his fingers, the mud on his boots, the way his gaze flicked to the window. "I'll be brief," Cole began, his voice rough but steady. "I'm not here by chance. I've been tracking Reginald Hawthorne for months, from London to this God-forsaken village. He's not what he seems, Miss Marple. That book, those crates, the manor, it's all part of something bigger, something dangerous." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her expression calm but her mind racing. "Dangerous, Mr. Cole? That's a strong word. Perhaps you'd care to explain what brings a man like you to St. Mary Mead, knocking on an old woman's door at midnight?" He leaned forward, his eyes burning with intensity. "I was a private investigator once, hired to find a stolen artifact, a book, rare and old, said to hold secrets worth killing for. The trail led to Hawthorne. He's no collector, no recluse. He's a broker, dealing in things most men wouldn't touch. That book in his library, the one with the snake symbol, it's the key to a network, a shadow trade in relics, documents, power." Miss Marple's needles, had they been in her hands, would have paused. The Ouroboros, again, its coils tightening around the manor's secrets. She thought of the locked study, the unopened box, the coded paper in the garden. "A network," she said, her tone mild. "That's quite a claim. And what do you believe Mr. Hawthorne is doing with this book?" Cole's jaw tightened. "He's not just keeping it. He's using it to draw people in. People like you, the doctor, that young woman who's always watching. He's testing you, seeing who'll bite. But he's not alone. There's someone else in that manor, someone pulling strings. I heard them last night arguing in the East Wing, and I saw the gardener digging again, hiding something in the roses." Miss Marple's heart quickened, but she kept her voice steady. "You've been busy, Mr. Cole, watching, listening, following. But why come to me? I'm merely a villager, with no stake in your investigations." He gave a wry smile, the first crack in his intensity. "Don't play the innocent, Miss Marple. I've asked around. You're no ordinary villager. You see things others miss, solve puzzles others can't. I need your help. Hawthorne's planning something. Tonight's garden stunt was just the start. If we don't act, someone's going to get hurt." She studied him, weighing his words against the tapestry in her mind. His story was compelling, but stories could be spun to deceive. The mud on his boots suggested he'd been in the manor's gardens, perhaps even the source of the crack they'd heard. His urgency felt genuine, but urgency could mask ulterior motives. Still, his mention of the East Wing, the argument, the gardener, it aligned too closely with Lucy's discoveries to dismiss. "What do you propose, Mr. Cole?" she asked, setting her cup down. "I'm not one for reckless adventures, but I'm listening." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Meet me at the manor tomorrow, at dusk. There's a side gate near the rose beds. It's never locked. I've seen the gardener use it. We can search the grounds, find what he's hiding. If I'm right, it'll lead us to the truth about Hawthorne and that book." Miss Marple's lips twitched, a ghost of a smile. A clandestine meeting at the manor was bold, perhaps foolish, but it was also an opportunity. The rosebeds held secrets, and Cole, for all his mystery, was a thread she needed to follow. "I'll consider it," she said, "but I make no promises, Mr. Cole. And I'll thank you to be honest with me. Lies, you see, have a way of unravelling." He nodded, rising to leave. "Fair enough. But be careful, Miss Marple. Hawthorne's watching you, same as he's watching me, and he doesn't like loose ends." As he slipped into the night, the door closing softly behind him, Miss Marple sat in silence, her tea growing cold. Cole's tale had added new threads to the tapestry. A shadow network, a stolen book, a hidden partner in the manor. She thought of the East Wing, where Lucy had heard voices, where the thud had sounded nights ago. And she thought of the gardener, always present, always watching, his hands deep in the earth. She rose, locking the door and drawing the curtains. Her notebook beckoned, and she added Cole's story, underlining the words East Wing and network. The manor was no longer just a house, it was a web, and she was caught in it, along with Lucy, Dr. Haydock, the vicar, and now Cole. But webs could be navigated, their strands traced to the centre, and Miss Marple was adept at such work. As she prepared for bed, the clock struck midnight, its chimes a reminder of the hours ticking toward dusk. She would meet Cole, she decided, but not alone. Lucy's sharp eyes and Dr. Haydock's steady presence might be needed, though she'd keep her plans close for now. The manor's secrets were stirring, and the midnight visitor had brought them closer to the surface. Miss Marple extinguished the lamp, the darkness settling around her, but her mind was alight, knitting the night's revelations into the pattern. The rosebeds, the book, the East Wing, they were calling, and she would answer, her needle sharp and her patience endless. Tomorrow, at dusk, the manor's shadow would yield another clue, and she would be ready to seize it. Chapter 9. Secrets of the Past. The dawn broke over St. Mary Mead with a tentative glow, as if the sun itself were wary of the secrets stirring in the village. Miss Jane Marple sat at her kitchen table, a cup of tea steaming gently as she reviewed her notebook. The midnight visit from Vincent Cole had left her restless, his tale of a shadow network and a stolen book weaving new threads into the tapestry of Hawthorne Manor's mystery. The gardener's digging, the coded paper, the unopened box, the crack in the rosebeds, each was a clue, but it was Cole's claim of an unseen partner in the manor that gnawed at her. Who was pulling the strings behind Reginald Hawthorne's polished facade? Her thoughts were interrupted by the memory of the previous evening's garden tour. The velvet pouch in Hawthorne's hand, the Ouroboros carved into the fountain. The manor was a labyrinth of symbols and secrets, and Miss Marple knew that to unravel it, she needed to look beyond the present, to the past, where the manor's foundations were laid, and its shadows first took root. The history Hawthorne had hinted at, of a family whose wealth and downfall were shrouded in rumour, was no mere anecdote. It was a key, and she intended to turn it. She dressed with care, choosing a dress of muted plum, its simplicity a canvas for her unobtrusive presence. Her handbag held her notebook, magnifying glass and torch, but today she added a small bundle of letters, old correspondence from Dolly Bantry's late husband, Colonel Bantry, who had once owned the manor. Dolly had mentioned them in passing, tucked away in a trunk, and Miss Marple had persuaded her to lend them. If anyone knew the manor's early days, it was the Colonel, whose meticulous records were as much a part of St. Mary Mead's history as the church bells. As she stepped outside, the village was stirring, its cottages bathed in morning light. She made her way to Dolly's house, where her friend was already up, fussing over a vase of roses that seemed to mock the manor's own. "Jane, you're early," Dolly said, her eyes bright with curiosity. "Is it about those letters?" "Dug them out last night. Such a bother, but there's piles of them. The Colonel was never one to throw anything away." Miss Marple smiled, her tone gentle but purposeful. "You're a treasure, Dolly. I'd like to look through them if I may. The manor's past may hold answers to what's happening now." Dolly led her to the parlour, where a trunk overflowed with papers, ledgers, receipts, and letters yellowed with age. Miss Marple settled at the table, her fingers deft as she sorted through the pile. Dolly hovered, her chatter a constant hum. "I remember the Colonel talking about the manor's first owners, the Ashfords. Odd family, he said. Made their fortune in trade, spices, I think. But there was talk of smuggling or worse. They vanished, you know, after some scandal. Nobody ever knew the details." Miss Marple's eyes sharpened, though her hands continued their steady work. Smuggling, scandal, a vanished family. The words were threads, bright and promising. She opened a letter dated 1823, its ink faded but legible, written in the Colonel's precise hand. It described a visit to the manor, then owned by one Edmund Ashford, a man of peculiar habits who kept a locked room no servant was allowed to enter. The letter mentioned a book, bound in dark leather, marked with a serpent, that Ashford prized above all else. Her heart quickened. The Ouroboros, the book in Hawthorne's library, the one Cole claimed was stolen, the one tied to a shadow network. She read on, the letter detailing rumours of Ashford's dealings with men from foreign shores, who arrived at night and left before dawn. There was a hint of something darker, a ritual perhaps or a pact, that had left the village uneasy. "Dolly," Miss Marple said, her voice calm but urgent, "did the Colonel ever mention a symbol, like a snake eating its tail?" Dolly frowned, tapping her chin. "Not that I recall, but he did say the Ashfords were obsessed with old symbols. Said they carved them everywhere, on furniture, stones, even the garden fountain. Why, Jane, is it important?" Miss Marple nodded, her mind knitting the past into the present. The fountain with its Ouroboros carving, the book, the coded paper, they were echoes of the Ashfords, their secrets buried but not forgotten. She tucked the letter into her bag, along with a few others, and thanked Dolly, promising to return them. Her next stop was the vicarage, where Mr. Clement's records might hold more clues about the manor's early days. The vicarage was a modest affair, its garden neat but unassuming. Mr. Clement welcomed her with his usual warmth, though his eyes held a flicker of unease, as if the manor's shadow had reached even here. "Miss Marple, what a pleasure," he said, ushering her into his study. "Is this about the manor? I confess, last night's gathering left me rather unsettled." She smiled, her tone disarming. "I'm merely curious about the past, Mr. Clement. The manor's history, particularly the Ashford family. Your records are so thorough. Might they mention anything about them?" The vicar hesitated, then nodded, leading her to a cabinet filled with leather-bound registers. "The Ashfords were before my time, of course, but the church keeps records of baptisms, marriages, deaths. They were a prominent family, though not well liked. There were whispers about their practices." As he searched, Miss Marple watched him, noting the nervous twitch of his fingers, the way his gaze darted to the window. Was it the manor's mystery, or something more personal? She thought of his oblivious demeanour at the gatherings, his prattling about stained glass. Was it a mask, or genuine distraction? He produced a register from 1820, its pages brittle but intact. "Here," he said, pointing to an entry. "Edmund Ashford's death, 1825. No cause listed, which is odd. And his wife, Clara, vanished the same year. The village thought she'd fled or worse. There's a note here in my predecessor's hand, something about a cursed book and a circle of serpents." Miss Marple's breath caught. A cursed book, a circle of serpents, the Ouroboros again, its coils tightening. She thanked the vicar, her mind racing as she left the vicarage. The Ashford story was no mere history. It was the root of the manor's secrets, its tendrils reaching into the present through Hawthorne, the book, the crates. She thought of Cole's warning, of a partner in the manor, and wondered if the Ashfords' legacy was more than artefacts, perhaps a living heir or a follower continuing their work. As she walked home, the village was alive with its usual rhythm, but Miss Marple felt the weight of the past pressing close. She needed to see Lucy, to share the Ashford connection and plan for their meeting with Cole at dusk. Lucy's sharp mind would be invaluable, and her discovery of the coded paper tied her to the garden's secrets. At her cottage, she found a note slipped under the door, written in a hurried scrawl. "Miss M. Meet me at the Blue Boar, noon. Urgent. L.E. Lucy." Miss Marple checked the clock, 11:30, and made her way to the inn, her steps brisk but her demeanour calm. The Blue Boar was quieter than usual, its tables half empty. Lucy sat in a corner, her face pale, but her eyes blazing with determination. "Miss Marple," she said, gesturing to the seat opposite, "I've found something else. I went back to the manor this morning. Yes, I know it's reckless, but I had to. The rose beds again. I dug where I saw the paper, and I found this." She slid a small object across the table, wrapped in a handkerchief. Miss Marple unfolded it, carefully revealing a metal disc, no larger than a shilling, etched with the Ouroboros. Its edges were worn, but there was a faint inscription in a language she didn't recognize. Latin, perhaps, or something older. Her heart quickened. Another clue, buried in the garden, tied to the Ashfords' legacy." "It was deeper than the paper," Lucy said, her voice low. "And there's more. I saw the gardener watching me from the maze. He didn't approach, but he knows I was there. And Miss Marple, I heard something. Voices from the east wing again. Not Hawthorne this time. Someone else, speaking in a language I couldn't understand." Miss Marple's mind knitted the threads together. The disc, the voices, the gardener's vigilance. She thought of Cole's claim of a hidden partner, the Ashford's circle of serpents. Was the manor a hub for something ancient, something that had outlived its founders? She tucked the disc into her bag, her voice steady. "You've done well, Lucy, but we must be cautious. Tonight at dusk we meet Mr. Cole at the manor. We'll search the rosebeds together, but we'll need Dr. Haydock too. His steadiness will balance our curiosity." Lucy nodded, her jaw set. "I'll find him. But Miss Marple, what is this? The disc, the book, the manor. It's bigger than we thought, isn't it?" Miss Marple's smile was gentle, but her eyes were steel. "Much bigger, Lucy. But secrets like stitches come undone with patience. We'll find the truth, one thread at a time." As they parted, Miss Marple felt the weight of the disc in her bag, a tangible link to the Ashfords' past. The manor was no longer just a house. It was a vault, its secrets locked in symbols and soil. Tonight, with Cole and Lucy, she would dig deeper, her needles sharp and her mind sharper, ready to unravel the secrets of the past that haunted Hawthorne Manor's present. Chapter 10. The Missing Heirloom. The afternoon sun bathed St. Mary Mead in a deceptive calm, its golden light softening the edges of a village teetering on the brink of revelation. Miss Jane Marple sat in her cottage, her knitting needles idle, as she turned the metal disc over in her hands, its Ouroboros etching glinting faintly. Lucy's discovery in the manor's rosebeds, coupled with Vincent Cole's midnight tale of a shadow network, had tightened the web of secrets surrounding Hawthorne Manor. The Ashford family's dark history, smuggling, a cursed book, a vanished wife loomed large, their legacy etched into the manor's stones, and now, it seemed, into the present. Tonight's meeting with Cole at dusk promised answers. But Miss Marple knew that answers often came with new questions, each one a thread in the tapestry she was weaving. Her morning had been spent cross-referencing the Colonel's letters with the Vicar's records, piecing together the Ashford's story. Edmund Ashford's obsession with a serpent-marked book, Clara's disappearance, the whispers of a circle of serpents. They pointed to a secret society, perhaps, or a cult, its roots buried in the manor's gardens and locked rooms. The disc, with its strange inscription, was a tangible link, but its meaning remained elusive. Was it a key, a token, or a warning? A knock at the door broke her reverie. It was Lily, her maid, her eyes wide with the village's latest gossip. "Miss Marple, there's talk at the grocer's," Lily said, clutching a basket of vegetables. "Mrs. Price says something's gone missing from the manor. A valuable, they're calling it. Nobody knows what, but Mr. Hawthorne's in a state, and the butler's been questioning the staff. They're saying it vanished last night during that garden tour." Miss Marple's needles, had they been in her hands, would have paused. A missing valuable the night of the garden tour. It was no coincidence. She thought of the velvet pouch Hawthorne had revealed, its contents hidden but heavy with promise. Was that the heirloom, now lost? Or was it something else, tied to the crates, the book, the disc? "Thank you, Lily," she said, her voice calm, but her mind racing. "Keep your ears open, won't you?" As Lily nodded and scurried off, Miss Marple added the news to her notebook, underlining missing heirloom and last night. The timing was critical. The crack in the rose beds, the gardener's absence, Cole's watchful presence. Something had shifted during the tour, and the manor's secrets were no longer content to stay buried. She needed to see Lucy and Dr. Haydock before the dusk meeting with Cole to ensure they were prepared for whatever the rose beds might yield. She donned her coat and hat, her appearance as unassuming as ever, and made her way to Lucy's lodging, a neat cottage near the church. Lucy was outside pruning a hedge, her movements brisk but her face tense. "Miss Marple," she said, setting down her shears, "I was about to come find you. Dr. Haydock's agreed to join us tonight. He's not happy about it, mind you, but he's coming. And there's something else. I overheard the butler at the post office talking to Mrs. Price. He mentioned a loss at the manor, something Mr. Hawthorne's desperate to recover. He sounded afraid." Miss Marple's eyes sharpened, though her smile remained gentle. "Afraid, Lucy? That's interesting. Did he say what was lost?" Lucy shook her head. "No, but he was in a hurry, kept looking over his shoulder. Miss Marple, do you think it's the pouch from the fountain, or something from those crates?" "Perhaps," Miss Marple said, her mind knitting the threads together. The pouch, the disc, the coded paper, the missing heirloom. They were connected. She was certain, but the link was still obscured. She thought of the Ashfords, their circle of serpents, and wondered if the heirloom was a relic of their rituals, something Hawthorne or his unseen partner valued above all else. They found Dr. Haydock at his surgery, his medical bag open on the desk, his expression gruff but resigned. "Miss Marple, Miss Isla's Barrow," he said, closing the bag with a snap. "I'll come to this meeting of yours, but I don't like it. Sneaking around the manor at dusk with some stranger from London, it's asking for trouble. What's this about a missing item? The village is buzzing with it." Miss Marple inclined her head, her tone measured. "So I've heard, Doctor. It seems something valuable vanished last night during our tour. Mr. Hawthorne is, apparently, quite distressed." Haydock's jaw tightened, his hand resting on his bag. "Distressed, eh? He's got plenty to be distressed about with those crates and that book. I don't trust him, Miss Marple, never have." She noted his tension, the way his fingers gripped the bag, as if it held more than medical supplies. Was he hiding something, or simply wary of the manor's secrets? "Trust is a luxury we can't afford just now," she said, "but vigilance, Doctor, that we can manage. Tonight we'll search the rose beds. Mr. Cole believes they hold answers, and I'm inclined to agree." They parted with a plan. Meet at the manor's side gate at dusk, armed with torches and caution. Miss Marple returned home, her thoughts on the missing heirloom. She reviewed her notebook, circling the words pouch, disc, and Ashfords. The Colonel's letters mentioned a locked room no servant could enter, and the vicar's records spoke of a cursed book. Was the heirloom a physical object, or something less tangible? A secret, perhaps, that someone had stolen or exposed? As the clock ticked toward dusk, she prepared for the meeting, choosing a dark shawl to blend with the shadows. Her handbag held her usual tools, plus a small trowel, borrowed from her garden shed for digging in the rose beds. She felt a prickle of anticipation, tempered by caution. Cole's motives were still unclear, and the manor's gardens were no place for recklessness. The village was quiet as she made her way to the manor, the sky a deepening indigo. Lucy and Dr. Haydock were already at the side gate, their faces pale in the fading light. Cole emerged from the shadows, his hat pulled low, his eyes scanning the grounds. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice low, "I'm glad you came. The rose beds are this way. Stay quiet. The gardener's been patrolling." They slipped through the gate, the manor looming like a silent sentinel. The rose beds were a sea of crimson and white, their petals glowing under the first stars. Miss Marple's torch cast a narrow beam, revealing the disturbed soil she'd noticed before. Cole knelt, his hands quick but careful, digging where Lucy had found the disc. "This is where I saw him," he whispered. "The gardener, hiding something." Dr. Haydock stood watch, his bag slung over his shoulder, while Lucy held her torch, steady. Miss Marple joined Cole, her trowel breaking the earth with surprising ease. The soil was loose, as if recently turned, and within moments her trowel struck something hard. She brushed the dirt away, revealing a small metal box, its lid etched with the Ouroboros. Her heart quickened, but before she could open it, a rustle came from the maze nearby, a deliberate sound, like footsteps on gravel. Cole froze, his hand on the box. "Someone's here," he hissed. Dr. Haydock's voice was gruff. "We need to go, now." But Miss Marple's eyes were on the box, its weight heavy in her hands. "Not yet," she said, her voice calm but firm. "This is what we came for." She slipped the box into her bag, her movements swift as the rustle grew louder. A shadow moved in the maze, tall and stooped. The gardener, she thought, or someone else. Cole grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the gate. "Move, Miss Marple. We're out of time." They fled, their torches bobbing in the dark, the manor's windows watching like eyes. Back at the gate, they paused, breathless, the box a silent promise in Miss Marple's bag. Cole's face was grim. "That was too close. But you've got it, the heirloom, or part of it. Open it, but not here, somewhere safe." Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. The box, the Ouroboros, the shadow in the maze, it was all connected to the Ashfords, to Hawthorne, to the missing heirloom. She thought of the pouch, the book, the coded paper. Was the box the key to the manor's secrets, or a trap? They parted ways, agreeing to meet the next day at Miss Marple's cottage. As she walked home, the village was silent, but the night was alive with whispers, of secrets, of shadows, of something stirring in the manor's heart. She clutched her bag, the box heavy within, and knew the missing heirloom was more than an object. It was a door to the past, and she was about to step through. At her cottage, she locked the door and drew the curtains, placing the box on her table. Its Ouroboros seemed to pulse in the lamplight, daring her to open it. But Miss Marple was patient. She would wait for Lucy and Dr. Haydock, for Cole's insights, for the light of day. The manor's secrets were close, their threads tightening, and she would unravel them, one careful stitch at a time. Chapter 11. A Dangerous Game. The morning light filtered through the lace curtains of Miss Jane Marple's cottage, casting delicate patterns on the table where the metal box sat, its Ouroboros etching glinting like a silent challenge. The box, unearthed from the manor's rosebeds the previous night, was a tangible piece of the puzzle that had consumed her thoughts since the first thud at Hawthorne Manor. Its weight in her bag had felt like a promise, or a warning, as she, Lucy Islesbarrow, Dr. Haydock and Vincent Cole fled the gardens, pursued by the shadow in the maze. Now, in the quiet of her home, Miss Marple knew the box was a pivot point, the moment where the manor's secrets could either unravel or tighten their grip. She had slept little, her mind too busy knitting the threads of the mystery, the Ashford family's dark legacy, the cursed book, the coded paper, the missing heirloom, and Cole's claim of a shadow network. The box, she suspected, was the missing heirloom, or a clue to it, stolen or hidden during the garden tour, its absence sending ripples through the manor's carefully curated facade. But opening it alone was unwise. The shadow in the maze, the gardener's vigilance, Cole's urgency, they all pointed to a game far more dangerous than she'd first imagined. Her notebook lay open, its pages dense with observations, the latest entry detailing the dusk raid, the loose soil, the box's Ouroboros, the rustle of footsteps. She added a question. Who was in the maze? The gardener was the obvious suspect, but Cole's presence in the village and the butler's fear at the post office suggested other players. And then there was Reginald Hawthorne himself, his charm a mask for something deeper, fear, ambition, or both. A knock at the door announced Lucy's arrival, her face pale but resolute, followed by Dr. Haydock, his medical bag slung over his shoulder, and Vincent Cole, his hat pulled low, his eyes scanning the room like a man expecting trouble. Miss Marple welcomed them, her demeanour as calm as a summer afternoon, though her pulse quickened at the sight of the group. They were allies, but alliances in a game like this were fragile, each player carrying their own secrets. "Good morning," she said, gesturing to the table where tea and biscuits waited. "I trust you're all as curious about our find as I am." Lucy's eyes went straight to the box, her voice sharp with anticipation. "Have you opened it yet, Miss Marple? After last night, I can't stop thinking about what's inside." "Not yet," Miss Marple said, her tone measured. "Some things are best done together, especially when they come from the manor's shadows." Dr. Haydock frowned, setting his bag down with a thud. "I don't like this, Miss Marple. Digging in the gardens, sneaking around with this Cole fellow. It's reckless. If that box is the heirloom, it's brought nothing but trouble. Hawthorne's in a panic, from what I hear." Cole's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, his gaze fixed on the box. Miss Marple noted his silence, the way his scarred hands flexed, as if itching to act. She turned to him, her smile gentle but probing. "Mr. Cole, you've been quiet. Last night you called this the heirloom, or part of it. Care to share what you know?" He hesitated, then leaned forward, his voice low. "I've seen boxes like this before in my work. They're not just containers. They're locks, meant to protect something valuable or dangerous. The Ouroboros isn't just a symbol. It's a mark of a group, one that's been trading in relics like that book for centuries. If this is what I think, it's tied to Hawthorne's network and the Ashfords before him." Lucy's eyes widened. "A group? You mean like a secret society? Cole nodded, his expression grim. Call it what you like. They deal in power, not just artifacts. That book in the library, the crates, this box, they're pieces of a bigger puzzle, and someone's desperate to keep it hidden. That shadow last night. They weren't just watching, they were hunting. Dr. Haydock snorted, but his hand rested on his bag, a nervous tick. Hunting? You're spinning tales, Cole. This is Saint Mary Mead, not some penny dreadful. Miss Marple's lips twitched, a ghost of a smile. The quietest places, Doctor, often hide the loudest secrets. Let's see what the box has to say. She lifted it, her fingers tracing the Ouroboros, feeling for a catch. The inscription, Latin she now confirmed, read, Ego sum alpha et omega. I am the beginning and the end. A biblical phrase, but in this context it felt more like a creed. The box was heavy, its lock intricate, but not impossible. She glanced at Cole, who produced a small tool from his pocket. A lockpick, she noted, unsurprised. May I? He asked, and at her nod he set to work, his movements deft. The others watched, the room silent save for the soft clicks of the pick. Lucy's breath was shallow, Dr. Haydock's jaw tight, and Miss Marple's eyes never left the box, cataloguing every detail. The faint scratches around the lock, the patina of age, the weight that suggested something solid within. With a final click, the lid sprang open, revealing a velvet lining cradling a single object. A key, wrought in silver, its handle shaped like a coiled serpent. The Ouroboros again, its eyes tiny emeralds that gleamed in the morning light. A folded piece of parchment lay beside it, its edges brittle but intact. Lucy gasped, leaning closer. A key? To what? Miss Marple lifted the parchment, unfolding it with care. The writing was in a spidery hand, a mix of English and Latin, detailing a chamber in the manor, sealed by the serpent's will. It mentioned the Ashfords, their pact, with those who guard the cycle, and a warning. The key opens the truth, but the truth claims its price. Dr. Haydock's voice was gruff. A chamber? This is nonsense. Probably some old family relic, hyped up to scare us. Cole's eyes were dark, his voice urgent. It's no relic, Doctor. That key opens something in the manor. Maybe the locked oak door, maybe something worse. The Ashfords didn't just vanish. They were erased. And this cycle is why. Hawthorne's playing with fire, and we're in the middle. Miss Marple set the parchment down, her mind racing. The key, the chamber, the cycle. It was the heart of the Ashfords' legacy and Hawthorne's obsession. She thought of the missing heirloom, the panic at the manor. Was this key what Hawthorne sought, or had its theft triggered something else? The shadow in the maze, the gardeners digging, the voices in the east wing. They were all converging, and the game was growing deadly. We need to return to the manor, Lucy said, her voice firm. Tonight, find this chamber, use the key. If Hawthorne's looking for it, we can't let him have it. Dr. Haydock shook his head. You're mad, girl. We're not detectives. This is for the police. Miss Marple's voice was calm, but unyielding. The police, Doctor, would stumble in the manor's shadows. We have the key, the knowledge, and the chance to act. But we must be cautious. Mr. Cole, you've been honest thus far, but I need your word. No reckless moves. This key is a weapon, and we don't yet know its target." Cole nodded, his scarred, hands still. "You have my word, Miss Marple, but we're running out of time. Hawthorne knows something's been taken. He'll tighten his grip." They agreed to meet at dusk, this time at Miss Marple's cottage, to plan their approach. As they left, Miss Marple lingered over the box, the key gleaming like a promise. She thought of the Ashfords, their pact, their disappearance. And she thought of Hawthorne, his charm fraying, his desperation palpable. The manor was a chessboard, and the key was a queen, capable of changing the game. The day passed in a blur of preparation. Miss Marple visited the vicar, probing for more on the Ashfords, but found only vague references to unholy rites in the manor's past. Dolly called, her voice trembling with news. The manor was locked down, its staff on edge, and Hawthorne had been seen pacing the grounds, his face a mask of fury. The missing heirloom, it seemed, had struck a nerve. As dusk fell, Miss Marple prepared for the meeting, her dress a sombre grey, her handbag heavy with the key and box. The manor loomed in her mind, its locked doors and hidden chambers calling. She thought of the shadow in the maze, the voices Lucy heard, Cole's warning of a partner. The game was dangerous, its players ruthless, but Miss Marple was no stranger to such stakes. She locked her door, the village silent under a sky of deepening indigo. The key was a weight in her bag, a bridge between past and present, and tonight she would cross it. The manor's secrets were close, their threads tightening, and she would unravel them, one careful stitch at a time, knowing the next move could be her last. Chapter 12. The Hidden Room. The twilight draped St. Mary Mead in a hush of shadows, the village holding its breath as Miss Jane Marple stood at her cottage door, her handbag heavy with the silver key and its Ouroboros-etched box. The day had been a whirlwind of revelations, the key's discovery, the Ashford family's cryptic parchment, Vincent Cole's tale of a shadow network. But now, as dusk settled, the manor's secrets beckoned with an urgency that could no longer be ignored. Tonight, Miss Marple, Lucy Islesbarrow, Dr. Haydock, and Cole would return to Hawthorne Manor, not as guests but as seekers, armed with the key that promised to unlock a hidden chamber, and perhaps the truth. Her cottage was a beacon of calm, its lamplight soft against the gathering dark. But Miss Marple's mind was a storm of threads. The missing heirloom, the gardener's vigilance, the voices in the east wing, the Ashfords' circle of serpents. The key, with its emerald-eyed serpent, was the pivot, its purpose tied to a chamber sealed by history and guarded by fear. She thought of Reginald Hawthorne, his charm fraying under the weight of the heirloom's loss, and wondered if he knew of the key's existence, or its power. Lucy arrived first, her face set with determination, her torch clutched like a weapon. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice low, "I've been thinking about that parchment. The chamber sealed by the serpent's will. It has to be behind that locked oak door, the one Hawthorne wouldn't open. We need to get to the east wing tonight." Miss Marple nodded, her smile serene but her eyes sharp. "I agree, Lucy. The east wing has been whispering to us from the start. The thud, the voices, the shadow. The key will speak there, I'm certain." Dr. Haydock followed, his medical bag slung over his shoulder, his expression a mix of reluctance and resolve. "I still say this is madness," he muttered, setting his bag down with a thud. "But if we're doing this, let's be quick. Sistidu, manners on edge. Mrs. Price told me Hawthorne's doubled the staff on watch." Vincent Cole was last, slipping in like a shadow, his hat low and his scarred hands restless. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice rough. "I checked the grounds this afternoon. The side gate's still open, but the gardener's been patrolling the rose beds. We'll need to move fast and quiet." Miss Marple studied him, noting the tension in his jaw, the faint mud on his boots. Cole was a wild card, his motives tangled in his pursuit of Hawthorne, but his knowledge was invaluable. "Thank you, Mr. Cole," she said. "We'll follow your lead to the gate, but once inside we stay together. The manor is no place for heroics." They agreed on a plan: enter through the side gate, skirt the gardens, and slip into the manor via a servant's entrance Cole had. Scouted. The east wing, where the locked oak door stood, was their goal. The key would guide them, but caution would keep them safe. Miss Marple tucked the box into her bag, the key wrapped in a handkerchief, its weight a constant reminder of the stakes. The walk to the manor was silent, the village asleep under a sky pricked with stars. The manor loomed ahead, its windows dark save for a faint glow in the east wing, like a beacon or a trap. Miss Marple's torch cast a narrow beam, her steps steady despite the prickle of unease in her bones. The air was thick with the scent of roses and something sharper, metallic, that had haunted the manor from the start. At the side gate, Cole led the way, his lockpick ready in case the latch had been secured. It hadn't, and they slipped through, the rosebeds a dark sea to their left. Miss Marple's eyes scanned the shadows, half expecting the gardener's stooped figure, but the grounds were still, the only sound the whisper of leaves in the breeze. The servant's entrance was a narrow door, half hidden by ivy, its lock yielding to Cole's skill. Inside, the manor was a labyrinth of silence, its corridors dim and heavy with the weight of history. They moved quickly, Cole navigating with the ease of someone who'd studied the house's bones. Miss Marple noted the scuff marks on the floor, the faint dust disturbed by recent footsteps, and filed them away, her mind knitting every detail into the tapestry. The east wing was colder, its air stale, as if the manor itself were holding its breath. The locked oak door stood at the end of a long hallway, its iron bands gleaming under their torches. Miss Marple's heart quickened, the key's weight in her bag a pulse of its own. She thought of the parchment's warning, "The truth claims its price," and steeled herself. Cole examined the lock, his voice a whisper. "This is old, but reinforced. The key should fit if it's the right one." Miss Marple handed him the key, its serpent handle cool against her fingers. The others gathered close, their breaths shallow, as Cole inserted it. The lock resisted, then turned with a deep, resonant click that echoed in the silence. The door creaked open, revealing a room shrouded in darkness, its air thick with dust and secrets. They stepped inside, their torches sweeping the space. It was a chamber unlike any in the manor. Small, windowless, its walls lined with shelves of ancient books and artifacts. At the centre stood a stone pedestal, carved with the Ouroboros, its surface stained with something dark, like ink or blood. A single object rested on it, a leather-bound book, its cover etched with the same serpent symbol that had haunted them from the start. Lucy's voice was a whisper. "The book, not the one in the library. This is different." Miss Marple approached, her magnifying glass in hand, her eyes tracing the book's edges. The Ouroboros was deeper here, almost alive, and the pages, when she touched them, were brittle but warm, as if recently handled. She thought of the Ashfords, their circle of serpents, and Cole's shadow network. This was no ordinary book. It was a ledger, a relic, a key to something vast and dangerous. Dr. Haydock's voice was gruff. "We should take it and go. This place gives me the creeps." But Cole's eyes were dark, his hand hovering over the book. "Not yet. There's more here. Look at the shelves, scrolls, relics, symbols. This is their vault, the Ashfords and whoever's carrying their torch now." Miss Marple's torch swept the room, revealing a series of carvings on the walls, serpents, stars, and words in a language she couldn't read. But one carving, near the pedestal, caught her eye. A map etched into the stone, showing the manor and its grounds, with a mark in the rosebeds. The coded paper, the disc, the key, they all pointed here, to this hidden room, and beyond, to the gardens. Before she could study it further, a sound broke the silence. A soft, deliberate tap, like the gardener's signal, coming from the hallway. The group froze, their torches dimming as if in fear. Miss Marple's hand tightened on her bag, her mind racing. The shadow in the maze, the voices, the thud. It was here, now, closing in. Cole's voice was a hiss. "We're not alone. Move." But Miss Marple's eyes were on the book, the pedestal, the map. "One moment," she said, her voice calm but unyielding. She slipped the book into her bag, its weight heavy with promise, and traced the map's mark with her finger. The rosebeds again. The game was circling back, its threads converging. The tapping grew louder, joined by footsteps, heavy, purposeful. Dr. Haydock grabbed her arm, his voice urgent. "Miss Marple, now." They fled, the door swinging shut behind them, the key still in the lock. The hallway was a blur of shadows, their torches bobbing as they retraced their steps. The servants' entrance loomed, and they spilled into the night, the manor's silence chasing them. The rosebeds were dark, the maze a labyrinth of menace, but no shadow followed, at least not one they could see. At the side gate they paused, breathless, the book a silent weight in Miss Marple's bag. Cole's face was grim. That was too close. "But you've got it. Their book, their truth. Guard it, Miss Marple. They'll come for it." Lucy's eyes blazed. "Who? Hawthorne, the gardener, or this partner you keep mentioning?" Cole's jaw tightened. "All of them. The circle doesn't break easily." Miss Marple's voice was steady, her mind already knitting the night's clues. The hidden room, the book, the map, the tapping. "We'll guard it, Mr. Cole, but the rosebeds call us back." The map showed a mark, something still buried there. They parted, agreeing to regroup the next day, the book's weight a shared burden. As Miss Marple walked home, the village was silent, but the night whispered of secrets unveiled and dangers unleashed. The hidden room had spoken, its book a key to the past, but the game was far from over. She would return to the rosebeds, her needles sharp and her patience endless, ready to unravel the next thread in the manor's deadly tapestry. Chapter 13. Betrayal Unmasked. The morning mist clung to St. Mary Mead like a shroud, softening the village's edges, but sharpening the tension that pulsed through Miss Jane Marple's cottage. The leather-bound book, taken from the hidden room in Hawthorne Manor's east wing, lay on her table, its Ouroboros-etched cover a silent accusation. Its pages, brittle and warm, held secrets she had only begun to glimpse. Cryptic entries in Latin, lists of names and references to a cycle that echoed the Ashford family's dark legacy, the map carved on the chamber's wall, with its mark in the rosebeds, was a call to return. But the tapping footsteps that had chased them from the manor lingered in her mind, a reminder that the game had turned deadly. Miss Marple's notebook was open, its pages dense with the threads of the mystery. The silver key, the coded paper, Vincent Cole's shadow network, the missing heirloom, and now the book. The hidden room had been a vault, not just of artifacts but of truths, and she suspected the book was the key to unravelling Reginald Hawthorne's plans, and the identity of his unseen partner. But the footsteps, the shadow in the maze, the gardener's vigilance, they pointed to betrayal, someone close who was watching, waiting, ready to strike. She sipped her tea, her knitting needles idle, as she reviewed the previous night's escape. Lucy Eilers-Barrow's quick thinking, Dr. Haydock's steady presence, and Cole's lockpicking had saved them. But the book's weight in her bag felt like a target. She thought of the manor's staff, the butler's fear, the gardener's silence, and the guests, Dolly's nervous chatter, the vicar's obliviousness, Dr. Haydock's guarded bag. One of them, she sensed, was not what they seemed, their loyalty a mask for something darker. A knock at the door broke her thoughts. It was Lucy, her face pale but her eyes fierce, followed by Dr. Haydock, his medical bag as ever-present as his. Frown. Vincent Cole slipped in last, his hat low, his scarred hands restless. The air was thick with urgency, the book a silent magnet drawing their gazes. "Good morning," Miss Marple said, her voice calm as she poured tea. "We've much to discuss, and little time. The book is a treasure, but it's also a danger. We need to understand it before we return to the rosebeds." Lucy leaned forward, her voice sharp. "I looked at it last night, Miss Marple. The names, some are old from the Ashfords' time, but others are recent. I recognized one, Clement, the vicar. It's listed with dates, payments, and something about a vow." Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her expression remained serene. Mr. Clement, with his bumbling demeanour and prattling about stained glass, was he part of the circle of serpents? She thought of his nervous fingers at the manor, his vague answers about the Ashfords. "That's troubling, Lucy," she said, "but names alone aren't proof. We must be certain before we act." Dr. Haydock's voice was gruff, his hand resting on his bag. "Clement, that's absurd. He's a vicar, not a conspirator. This book's making us paranoid. We should turn it over to the police and be done with it." Cole's eyes darkened, his voice low. "The police won't touch this, Doctor. The circle's reach is long, London, Paris, beyond. I've seen what they do to loose ends. That book lists their dealings, their members. If Clement's in it, he's no innocent, and he's not the only one. There's a name missing. Hawthorne's partner, the one I heard in the East Wing. Miss Marple's mind raced, knitting the threads together. The vicar, the partner, the book's cryptic entries. She needed to see the names herself, to trace their connections. She opened the book, its pages crackling, and scanned the lists. Lucy was right. Clement appeared, tied to payments and a vow of silence. But there were others, initials, pseudonyms, and one that caught her eye, LV, with a recent date and a note about delivery. Her thoughts flicked to the manor's staff, the guests, the village. LV, could it be Lucy? Or someone else, hiding in plain sight? She closed the book, her voice steady. We'll investigate Mr. Clement, but discreetly. And we must return to the rosebeds tonight, to find what the map marked. But first, we need to know who's watching us. The footsteps last night. They knew we were there. Lucy's jaw tightened. The gardener? He's always there, digging, watching. I'd bet he's the one who chased us. Cole shook his head. Not just him, the butler's involved. His fear's not just nerves. And Hawthorne's tightening the net. I saw him this morning, meeting someone at the manor's gate. Couldn't see who, but they were arguing. Dr. Haydock's frown deepened. This is getting out of hand. If we go back, we're walking into a trap. Miss Marple's smile was gentle, but her eyes were steel. A trap, Doctor, is only dangerous if you don't see it. We'll go prepared, and we'll watch each other. Betrayal thrives in shadows, but light reveals it. They planned their return. Dusk again, the side gate, the rosebeds. Cole would scout ahead. Lucy and Dr. Haydock would cover the flanks, and Miss Marple would carry the book and key, her torch ready for the map's mark. But as they spoke, a prickle of unease grew in her chest. The initials LV, the vicar's name, Cole's insistence on a partner. Someone was closer to the truth than they admitted, and closer to betrayal. The day passed in a blur of preparation. Miss Marple visited the vicarage, probing Mr. Clement with questions about the manor's history. But his answers were vague, his smile strained. She noted a new lock on his study door, a detail that didn't escape her. At the grocer's, Mrs. Price whispered of Hawthorne's rage, his staff searching the grounds, and a stranger, possibly Cole, seen near the manor at dawn. The village was a cauldron of suspicion, and Miss Marple felt its heat. As dusk fell, they gathered at her cottage, their faces set with resolve. Miss Marple wore a dark shawl, her bag heavy with the book, key, and trowel. The manor loomed in her mind, its rosebeds a graveyard of secrets. She thought of the footsteps, the shadow, the initials. Betrayal was near, its mask slipping, and she would unmask it. At the side gate, Cole led the way, his lockpick unnecessary as the latch yielded. The rosebeds were dark, their petals blood-red in the torchlight. Miss Marple's beam found the spot from the map, a patch of soil subtly raised near a stone marked with a faint Ouroboros. She knelt, her trowel digging, while Lucy and Dr. Haydock stood watch, Cole scanning the maze. The soil parted, revealing a cloth-wrapped bundle, heavy and cold. Miss Marple unwrapped it, her breath catching. A silver dagger, its hilt a coiled serpent, its blade etched with the Ouroboros. A note was tucked inside, in the same spidery hand as the parchment. The cycle demands sacrifice. LV delivers. Lucy's voice was a whisper. LV, it's in the book too. Who is it? Before Miss Marple could answer, a figure emerged from the maze. Not the gardener, but Mr. Clement, his face pale, his eyes wild. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice trembling. "You don't understand what you've taken, Doctor." Haydock stepped forward, his bag raised like a shield. "Clement, what the devil are you doing?" The vicar's gaze darted to the dagger, then to Miss Marple. "The book, the key, they're not yours. The cycle, it's bigger than you know. I tried to warn you, but you kept digging." Miss Marple's voice was calm, but her mind was ablade. "Warn us, Mr. Clement, or betray us. Your name is in the book, tied to vows and payments. Who is LV?" He flinched, his hands shaking. I had no choice. They promised to protect the village, to keep the past buried. LV, it's not me, it's—" A sharp crack cut him off, a gunshot, echoing from the manor. Clement staggered, clutching his arm, blood seeping through his sleeve. Cole grabbed Miss Marple, pulling her behind a hedge, as Lucy and Dr. Haydock ducked low. The rose beds were a battlefield now, the manor's windows blazing with light. Miss Marple clutched the dagger and book, her heart pounding, but her resolve unbroken. Clement's betrayal was unmasked, but the gunshot, the initials LV, the cycle, they pointed to a deeper treachery. The game was at its peak, its players revealed, and she would play to the end. They fled, dragging Clement with them, his whimpers drowned by the manor's sudden clamour. Shouts, footsteps, the bark of dogs. At the gate, Miss Marple's mind raced. The dagger, the book, the vicar's confession. Betrayal had a face, but the mastermind, LV, the partner, was still hidden, and the gunshot was their move. Back at her cottage, they bandaged Clement's wound, his face ashen as he muttered apologies. Miss Marple's needles would have clicked had they been in her hands, weaving the night's chaos into the tapestry. The manor's secrets were bleeding into the open, and she would follow the trail, her eyes sharp and her patience endless, ready to face the cycle's final gambit. Chapter 14. The Final Puzzle. The night clung to St. Mary Mead with a restless energy. The village's quiet shattered by the gunshot that had echoed from Hawthorne Manor. Miss Jane Marple sat in her cottage, the lamplight casting stark shadows. Across the table where the Ouroboros-etched book, the silver dagger, and the key lay like pieces of a shattered mosaic. The chaos of the rosebeds, Mr. Clement's betrayal, the blood on his sleeve, the unseen shooter, had brought the manor's secrets to a boiling point. The tapestry Miss Marple had been weaving was nearly complete. Its threads of the Ashford legacy, the shadow network, and the mysterious LV converging in a pattern that promised both answers and danger. Her cottage was a fortress of tension, its doors locked and curtains drawn. Lucy Islesbarrow sat by the fire, her face pale but resolute, cleaning dirt from her hands after their frantic escape. Dr. Haydock tended to Mr. Clement, whose arm was bandaged, his face a mask of guilt and fear as he muttered apologies. Vincent, Cole stood by the window, his hat discarded, his scarred hands clenched as he watched the dark for signs of pursuit. The book, dagger and key were their trophies, but they were also targets. and Miss Marple knew the Manor's unseen players. LV, the partner, perhaps Hawthorne himself, would not let them rest. She opened her notebook, its pages a map of the mystery. The thud, the crates, the coded paper, the hidden room, the vicar's name in the book, the dagger's note about LV's delivery. Clement's confession had unmasked one traitor, but his claim that LV was not him, cut off by the gunshot, left the mastermind's identity maddeningly close, yet out of reach. Miss Marple's mind worked like her needles, stitching clues into a pattern. But the final piece, the shooter, the cycle's endgame, eluded her. "Mr. Clement," she said, her voice calm but piercing, "you've admitted your part in this. Cycle, you took payments, made vows. Now tell us who LV is and why they shot at you. The truth, please. Lies will only tighten the noose." Clement flinched, his eyes darting to the book. I don't know their name," he stammered. "I swear it. They contacted me years ago, through letters, promising to protect the village if I kept silent about the Manor's past. The Ashfords' rights, their book, it was all real, Miss Marple. I thought I was doing good, preserving peace. LV was their agent, delivering instructions, artifacts. The dagger, the key, they came, through LV, but I never saw their face." Lucy's voice was sharp. "You betrayed us, Vicar. You knew we were digging, and you told them. That's why they were ready last night." Clement's head bowed, tears mixing with sweat. "I had to. They threatened the village, my flock, but I didn't expect the gunshot. They must think I've said too much." Dr. Haydock's voice was gruff, his hand still on his medical bag. "Enough of this. We've got the book, the dagger, the key. Let's take them to the police and end this madness." Cole's eyes flashed, his voice low. "The police can't touch this, Doctor. The cycle's bigger than St. Mary Mead. That book lists names, London, Paris, Rome. LV is here now, and they're not done. The shooter missed Clement on purpose, a warning. They want the book back, and they'll kill for it." Miss Marple's fingers traced the dagger's serpent, hilt, her mind racing. The gunshot as a warning, LV's anonymity, the book's global reach. It was a game of power, not just relics. She thought of the rosebeds, the map's mark, the hidden room. The cycle demanded sacrifice, the note had said, and LV was its enforcer. But who? The butler with his fear? The gardener with his silence? Or someone closer, hidden among the guests? She opened the book, its pages crackling, and studied the entries again. LV appeared repeatedly, tied to deliveries, rituals, and a recent note. The heirloom secures the cycle's renewal. The heirloom, the key, the dagger, or the book itself, was the cycle's heart, and its theft had sparked the Manor's panic. She thought of Hawthorne, his rage at the loss, and wondered if he was LV, or merely a pawn. "Lucy," she said, her tone measured, "you recognize the name Clement in the book. Were there others, names we know?" Lucy nodded, her eyes on the book. "Not many. There was H, which could be Hawthorne, and DH. Maybe you, Doctor. But LV is everywhere, like a ghost. The dates match our visits to the Manor, Miss Marple. They've been watching us from the start." Dr. Haydock's face reddened. "Me? That's absurd. I've no part in this nonsense." Miss Marple's gaze lingered on his bag, the way he guarded it. "No one's accusing you, Doctor. But the book doesn't lie. We're all pieces in this puzzle, and LV is the hand moving us." A sudden knock at the door made them freeze. Cole's hand went to his pocket, where Miss Marple suspected a weapon hid. She rose, her torch in hand, and peered through the curtain. It was Dolly Bantry, her face frantic, her hat askew. Miss Marple opened the door, her voice calm. "Dolly, what's wrong?" "Jane, it's the manor," Dolly gasped, stepping inside. "I was passing by, and there's lights everywhere, men with dogs and Hawthorne himself, shouting about a theft. They're searching the village, Jane. They know you've got something." Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her mind was clear. The manor was closing in, LV's warning shot escalating to a hunt. She thought of the rosebeds, the map's mark. Something was still buried, the cycle's final piece. "Thank you, Dolly," she said. "Stay here. Keep Mr. Clement company. We have one last move to make." She turned to the others, her voice unyielding. "We return to the rosebeds now. The map showed a mark we haven't found. It's the last clue, and LV will be there waiting. We end this tonight." Cole nodded, his eyes dark. "It's a trap, but we're ready. I've got your back." Lucy's jaw set. "I'm in. Let's find LV and finish this." Dr. Haydock hesitated, then grabbed his bag. "Fine, but if this goes wrong, don't blame me." They left under cover of darkness, the village a maze of shadows. The manor loomed, its lights blazing, dogs barking in the distance. Miss Marple's bag held the book, dagger and key, their weight a reminder of the stakes. The side gate was locked now, but Cole's lockpick made short work of it, and they slipped into the gardens, the rosebeds a dark promise ahead. The map's mark was near a stone, its Ouroboros faint but clear. Miss Marple knelt, her trowel digging, while Cole and Lucy stood watch, Dr. Haydock's torch sweeping the maze. The soil parted, revealing a small locked casket, its lid etched with the serpent. The key fit perfectly, clicking open to reveal a scroll, its script matching the book's, names, dates, and a final entry. LV seals the cycle with the heirloom's return. Before she could read more, a figure stepped from the maze. Not the gardener, but the butler, his face no longer impassive but cold with purpose. In his hand was a pistol, its barrel glinting. "Miss Marple," he said, his accent sharper now, "you've gone too far. The book, the dagger, the scroll, hand them over." Lucy gasped, but Miss Marple's voice was steady. "LV, I presume. Your fear at the post office was a fine act, but your hand betrays you now." The butler's eyes narrowed, but before he could speak, Dr. Haydock moved, his bag swinging to knock the pistol aside. A shot rang out, grazing the stone, and Cole tackled the butler, pinning him as Lucy grabbed the gun. Miss Marple clutched the casket, her mind racing. The butler, LV, the cycle's enforcer, working in the shadows while Hawthorne played the host. The butler struggled, his voice a hiss. "You don't understand. The cycle protects, it preserves. Without it, everything falls." Miss Marple's eyes were steel. "Preserves what? Power? Greed? The Ashford's curse ends tonight." Cole bound the butler's hands. Lights flared from the manor. Hawthorne's men, closing in. Miss Marple slipped the scroll into her bag, the book and dagger beside it. The puzzle was complete, LV unmasked, but the cycle's reach, London, Paris, Rome, meant the game wasn't over. They fled, the rosebeds behind them, the manors, dogs howling. Back at the cottage, they locked the door, the scroll revealing the cycle's scope. A network of relics, wealth and influence, with L.V. Leonard Vaughan, the butler, as its local agent. Hawthorne was a puppet, not the master. Miss Marple's needles would have clicked, weaving the final threads, but the manor's shadow lingered, its secret safe for now, but not forever. She looked at her allies, Lucy, Cole, Haydock, even the broken Clement, and knew the fight was theirs to finish. The final puzzle was solved, but the cycle's end would demand one last stand, and she was ready, her mind sharp and her patience endless. Chapter 15. The Cycle Broken. The dawn broke over St. Mary Mead with a fragile clarity, the village stirring under a sky washed clean by the night's chaos. Miss Jane Marple sat at her kitchen table, a cup of tea cooling as she surveyed the relics of Hawthorne Manor's mystery. The Ouroboros-etched book, the silver dagger, the key and the scroll, each a testament to the Ashford family's dark legacy and the shadow network that had haunted the manor. The unmasking of Leonard Vaughan, the butler, as L.V., had shattered the cycle's secrecy, but the gunshot in the rosebeds and Reginald Hawthorne's desperate hunt for the stolen heirlooms warned that the game was not yet won. The tapestry Miss Marple had woven was complete, its threads of betrayal, greed and ancient rights laid bare. But the final act loomed, demanding a resolution that would either break the cycle or see it reborn. Her cottage was a sanctuary, its doors locked against the manor's reach, but the air was heavy with the weight of last night's revelations. Lucy Islesbarrow sat by the window, her eyes scanning the lane for signs of pursuit, her hands still smudged with rosebed soil. Dr. Haydock paced, his medical bag open as he checked supplies, his gruff demeanour softened by exhaustion. Vincent Cole leaned against the wall, his scarred hands still, his gaze fixed on the book as if it held both salvation and damnation. Mr. Clement, bandaged and broken, sat in silence, his confession of complicity in the cycle, a wound as raw as the bullet graze on his arm. Miss Marple's notebook lay open, its final entry a map of the truth. The Ashford Circle of Serpents, a network trading in relics and power. Vaughan's role as L.V., enforcing the cycle's will. Hawthorne as a puppet, driven by ambition but not control. The scroll's list of names, London, Paris, Rome, revealed the cycle's scope, a web that stretched far beyond St. Mary Mead, but the manor was its heart, and the rosebeds with their buried secrets were its altar. Miss Marple knew the cycle's renewal hinged on the heirlooms, and with them in her possession, she held the power to end it, or become its next target. She sipped her tea, her mind as sharp as her needles, and addressed the group, her voice calm but unyielding. We've unmasked L.V., but the cycle is not yet broken. The manor is awake, and Mr. Hawthorne, or those above him, will come for the book, the dagger, the scroll. We must act first, return to the manor, and confront the truth in the light of day. Lucy's eyes blazed, her voice firm. Confront Hawthorne. After last night he'll have the place locked down. But I'm with you, Miss Marple. The rosebeds, theirs. Still something there, isn't there? The map's mark wasn't just the casket. Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts on the stone in the rosebeds. Its Ouroboros a beacon. "The cycle demands sacrifice," the scroll said. "The rose beds are its stage, and I suspect one final secret lies beneath. We'll find it, and we'll face Mr. Hawthorne with the truth." Dr. Haydock stopped pacing, his jaw tight. "This is insanity. We've got enough to go to the police. Let them handle Hawthorne and his network. Why risk our lives again?" Cole's voice was low, his eyes dark. "The police won't stop this, Doctor. The cycle's survived centuries because it buys silence. We have the heirlooms, the proof. If we don't end it now, it'll find new hands, maybe in this village." Miss Marple's gaze lingered on Cole, noting the conviction in his scarred hands, the weight of his past as a hunter of the cycle's relics. She thought of the vicar's tears, the butler's cold resolve, Hawthorne's fraying charm. The cycle thrived on loyalty and fear, but it was fragile, its secrets exposed by their persistence. "Mr. Cole is right," she said. "The cycle ends with us, or it begins anew. We go together, and we go now." They prepared quickly, Miss Marple donning a dark coat, her bag heavy with the heirlooms and her trowel, a tool now as vital as her notebook. Lucy checked her torch. Dr. Haydock packed bandages, and Cole slipped a small knife into his pocket, his eyes meeting Miss Marple's with a nod of understanding. Clement, too weak to join, would stay with Dolly Bantry, who arrived to guard him, her nervous chatter a stark contrast to the group's resolve. The manor stood silent under the morning sun, its windows blank but watchful. The side gate was locked, but Cole's lockpick opened it, and they slipped into the gardens, the rose beds a patchwork of crimson and shadow. The stone with the Ouroboros mark was undisturbed, but Miss Marple's trowel found soft soil beneath, yielding a final discovery. A small sealed vial, its contents a dark liquid that shimmered with an unnatural sheen. A note was tied to it, in the same spidery hand. "The cycle's blood to seal the vow." Lucy's breath caught. Poison, or something worse? Miss Marple's mind raced, knitting the vial into the tapestry. The Ashfords' rites, the stained pedestal in the hidden room, the cycle's demand for sacrifice. This was the ritual's heart, a poison or elixir to bind its members. She slipped it into her bag, her voice steady. "Whatever it is, it's the cycle's power, and we'll use it to end them." Before they could move, a voice cut through the morning air. Reginald Hawthorne, stepping from the maze, his silver hair dishevelled, his eyes wild with desperation. Behind him were two men, armed with clubs, their faces hard. "Miss Marple," he said, his charm gone, his voice raw. "You've taken everything. The book, the dagger, the scroll. Give them back, and you walk away. The cycle doesn't forgive." Miss Marple faced him, her posture frail, but her eyes steel. "The cycle is broken, Mr. Hawthorne. Leonard Vaughan is in our custody, your network exposed. The book names your masters, London, Paris, Rome. They'll not thank you for this failure." Hawthorne's face twisted, his hand trembling. "You don't understand. I was to be their equal, not their pawn. The heirlooms were my offering, my proof. Without them, I'm nothing." Cole stepped forward, his knife glinting. "You're done, Hawthorne. The cycle's finished. Tell your men to stand down, or you'll answer for more than theft." The men hesitated, their clubs lowering as Lucy's torch swept their faces. Dr. Haydock's presence a quiet threat. Miss Marple held up the vial, its dark liquid catching the sun. "This is your cycle's blood," she said. "A poison, I suspect, to silence dissent. Shall we test it, Mr. Hawthorne, or will you end this now?" Hawthorne's shoulders sagged, the fight draining from him. "It's over," he whispered, waving his men back. "Take it all. The cycle's theirs, not mine. They bound him, his men retreating into the maze, their loyalty as brittle as the cycle itself." Miss Marple led the group to the manor's drawing-room, where the butler, Vaughan, had been left, now guarded by village constables summoned by Dolly's quick thinking. The book, dagger, scroll, and vial were laid out, their secrets no longer hidden, the cycle's power broken by exposure. The police arrived, led by Inspector Craddock, a familiar face from St. Mary Mead's darker days. Miss Marple explained the cycle, the Ashford's legacy, Vaughan's role as LV, and Hawthorne's ambition. The book's names would lead to arrests far beyond the village, Craddock promised, his respect for Miss Marple's insight clear in his nod. As the manor was sealed, its staff questioned. Miss Marple walked the rosebeds one last time, the Ouroboros stone now just a relic, its power spent. Lucy joined her, her voice soft. "We did it, Miss Marple. The cycle's gone." Miss Marple's smile was gentle, her eyes on the horizon. "For now, Lucy, secrets have a way of coiling back, but we've cut this thread, and that's enough." At her cottage, she sat by the fire. Her knitting resumed, the scarf growing with each steady stitch. The village settled into its quiet rhythm, but Miss Marple knew its peace was fragile, its shadows ever watchful. The cycle was broken, its heirlooms locked away, its players unmasked, but the world beyond St. Mary Mead hummed with new mysteries, and she would be ready, her needles sharp and her patience endless, for whatever came next.